In this video, we're going to be breaking down 3 hours of Rick and Morty's worst and greatest episodes ever. Let's get started. First up, we're going to be diving into the 6 greatest Rick and Morty episodes that have defined the series and blown fans away. These are the episodes that showcase everything Rick and Morty does best. The perfect blend of sci-fi concepts, dark humor, emotional depth, and mind-bending storytelling that made this show a cultural phenomenon. The Ricklantis Mixup. A deep dive into Rick and Morty's most complex episode. The Ricklantis Mixup stands as one of Rick and Morty's most ambitious episodes, weaving together multiple storylines that explore power, corruption, and the cost of civilization. While Rick and Morty go on a simple adventure to Atlantis, the episode follows various characters living on the Citadel of Ricks, showing us what daily life looks like in this massive structure filled with infinite versions of Rick and Morty. The Citadel's political transformation. The episode opens with Rick K22 and his Morty visiting our Rick's garage, asking for donations to rebuild the Citadel. Our Rick immediately dismisses them, reminding everyone that he destroyed the Council of Ricks and left the place to rot. This sets up the central tension. While Rick thinks he's done with the Citadel forever, the place continues to exist and evolve without him. The Citadel has become a functioning society with its own news stations, schools, factories, and police force. Rick D716 and Rick D716B anchor the morning news, delivering updates about gravity outages and uranium-powered health problems with the same dry professionalism you'd expect from any local news team. The normalcy of their banter makes the absurdity of their situation even more striking. The biggest story is the upcoming presidential election. For the first time, the Citadel is holding democratic elections, with several Rick candidates running typical political campaigns. There's retired General Rick promising more lasers, juggling Rick literally juggling his policy proposals, and various other Ricks offering standard political rhetoric. But the real surprise candidate is a Morty running on the Morty Party ticket. The factory workers' descent. One of the most powerful storylines follows Rick J22, who works at the Simple Rick's wafer cookie factory. The episode reveals the disturbing truth behind these cookies through a commercial that plays like a nightmare version of typical feel-good advertising. Simple Rick is a version of Rick who chose family over science, and the factory captures his happy memories to flavor their cookies. They keep him hooked up to machines, living the same joyful moment with his daughter over and over while they harvest the chemicals his brain produces. Rick J22 has worked this assembly line for 15 years, stamping logos on cookies while watching his boss get promoted. When Cool Rick gets the supervisor position instead of him, despite being new to the Citadel, J22 finally snaps. He kills his supervisor and takes Simple Rick hostage, demanding a portal gun to escape what he calls a prison. The factory owner, Rick D. Sanchez III, arrives and seems to support J22's rebellion. He walks J22 out through cheering factory workers, giving him a car and promising him freedom. But this apparent victory is revealed as another trap. Rick D. Sanchez III shoots J22 and hooks him up to the same happiness harvesting machine that held Simple Rick. The factory creates a new product line called Freedom Wafer Selects, using J22's memories of thinking he was escaping. Police corruption in Mortytown. The police storyline follows Cop Rick and his partner Cop Morty as they patrol Mortytown, the rundown area where Mortys without Ricks end up living. Cop Morty is a veteran officer who has become bitter and violent, using excessive force against the Mortys he's supposed to protect. When they investigate a robbery, Cop Morty threatens suspects with lethal violence, showing how the system has corrupted even those meant to serve it. The partnership reveals deep problems in how the Citadel operates. Cop Morty takes bribes from Big Morty, a crime boss who runs illegal operations. When Cop Rick refuses to take dirty money, tensions escalate. Big Morty reveals that Cop Morty's previous partner also refused to be corrupt, hinting at what happened to him. During a raid on the Mortytown Locos' hideout, the corruption reaches its peak. After Cop Rick gets stabbed while trying to help what appears to be a traumatized child, Morty, Cop Morty sends him outside to get medical attention. While Rick is gone, Cop Morty destroys the entire building with explosives, killing all the suspects to cover up the evidence. When Rick asks what happened, Cop Morty lies and says it was Mortys killing Mortys. The police storyline ends at The Creepy Morty, a disturbing establishment where Mortys provide entertainment for other Mortys. When the corruption is finally exposed, both Cop Morty and Big Morty end up dead, but the system that created them remains unchanged. The school kid's journey. 4 misfit Mortys from the Morty Academy decide to skip graduation and search for the legendary wishing portal. Slick Morty leads the group, which includes Fat Morty, Glasses Morty, and Lizard Morty. Each character represents a different type of outcast. Slick has a trauma implant that makes everyone around him sad. Lizard Morty was fused with a lizard by a previous Rick, and the others have their own problems fitting into the Citadel's rigid system. Their teacher, Teacher Rick, treats the Mortys with barely hidden contempt, especially Slick, whose multiple dead Ricks make him a reminder of the system's failures. The Morty Academy trains young Mortys to be perfect sidekicks, teaching them phrases like "good idea, Rick," and "this is a great adventure." The 4 Mortys break out of school and travel through the countryside, stealing food and camping in the woods. Their journey becomes a quest for meaning in a world that sees them as disposable. When they finally reach the wishing portal, they discover it's actually just a garbage disposal where the Citadel dumps its waste. Slick's final act is throwing himself into the portal, wishing that something about their lives would change. His sacrifice appears meaningless until the episode's end reveals that his wish actually worked. The entire Citadel's power structure gets overturned. The election and its aftermath. The presidential campaign centers on candidate Morty, who runs on a platform of unity between Ricks and Mortys. His speeches draw huge crowds as he talks about seeing division not between species, but between those who benefit from the Citadel's problems and everyone else. The news anchors mock him as adorable but harmless, calling him a little jackass while showing footage of his campaign events. Candidate Morty's message resonates because it addresses real problems. The Citadel operates on a rigid hierarchy where Ricks automatically get better treatment than Mortys, regardless of their individual qualities or contributions. His speeches, delivered during the factory hostage situation and police corruption, point out how the system pits working-class Ricks and Mortys against each other while the powerful profit from their conflict. During the presidential debate, candidate Morty delivers a powerful speech about seeing injustice everywhere, in schools that suppress individuality, in streets where Mortys police other Mortys, and in factories where identical workers get vastly different treatment. His message culminates with, "You are outnumbered," speaking to everyone who feels trapped by the system. Campaign manager Morty initially supports his candidate, but receives a mysterious dossier from investigator Rick that changes everything. The documents apparently reveal something shocking about candidate Morty's true identity. Campaign manager Morty tries to assassinate candidate Morty at a public event, shooting him in the chest while shouting that he had to be stopped. The true power behind the throne. The assassination attempt fails, and candidate Morty wins the election by a landslide. But his victory celebration is cut short when we see him meeting with the Shadow Council of Ricks, the real power behind the Citadel. These Ricks, led by Garment District Rick, explain that they've been running things since before the council and will continue regardless of who sits in the president's seat. This is where the episode's darkest turn occurs. President Morty asks the Shadow Council members to raise their hands if Garment District Rick speaks for them. When 7 Ricks raise their hands, President Morty signals his guards to execute them all with shock weapons. The remaining 2 Ricks quickly agree that he's in charge. President Morty's transformation is complete when he gives a chilling speech about power and order. The episode reveals through floating documents in space that he is actually Evil Morty, the same character who controlled Rick through a remote in an earlier episode. The eye patch that once hid his cybernetic implants now sits on his desk as he consolidates power. The cycle continues. The episode ends with a montage showing President Morty's new order taking effect. Morty, divided by Rick banners, replace the old Rick emblems on buildings. The police get new badges and uniforms. The 3 surviving school Mortys work in the fields, their graduation replaced by manual labor. Bodies of the executed Ricks float in space alongside earlier victims of the Citadel's violence. Meanwhile, our Rick and Morty return from their Atlantis adventure, completely unaware of the political revolution that just occurred. Rick insists the Citadel will never affect their lives again while celebrating his successful trip to see mermaids. The irony is thick. While Rick thinks he's moved beyond the Citadel's influence, a Morty who learned from Rick's own methods has just seized control of the entire structure. The floating documents in space show images of evil Morty's past, including pictures of him with what appears to be a puppet Rick. These hints suggest a deeper history of manipulation and control that goes back to his first appearance in the series. The Ricklantis Mixup uses the Citadel as a mirror for real-world politics and social problems. Through stories of factory workers, corrupt police, struggling students, and ambitious politicians, the episode shows how power structures perpetuate themselves even when the people in charge change. Rick J22's rebellion gets co-opted into another product to sell. Cop Rick's attempt at honest policing ends with him freed by a corrupt system. The school kids find their wishes granted, but in ways they never expected, and candidate Morty's promise of change transforms into a new form of authoritarian control. The episode suggests that real change requires more than just replacing the people in power. It requires questioning the entire system that created those power structures in the first place. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Now, moving on to Pickle Rick. Pickle Rick, when science becomes self-destruction. Pickle Rick represents everything brilliant and destructive about Rick Sanchez rolled into one ridiculous vegetable. The episode starts with what seems like another crazy Rick experiment, but quickly becomes a deep examination of how the smartest person in the universe uses his intelligence to avoid dealing with basic human problems. While the family heads to therapy, Rick literally transforms himself into a pickle to escape confronting his issues, leading to an adventure that proves Dr. Wong's point better than any therapy session ever could. The perfect crime against responsibility. The episode begins with Morty getting ready for what we learn is mandatory family therapy. Rick calls from the garage, and when Morty finds him, Rick reveals his latest transformation with pure pride and excitement. He turned himself into a pickle just because he could, declaring himself Pickle Rick with the enthusiasm of someone who just solved world hunger. But Morty immediately suspects what we all know. This timing cannot be a coincidence. The setup becomes clear when Beth, Summer, and Morty prepare to leave for their therapy appointment. Rick claims he forgot about the session and suggests Beth could carry him in her purse if she really needs him there. The excuse falls apart when Morty spots a syringe hanging above Rick's workbench, attached to a timer set to go off exactly when they would have left for therapy. Rick dismisses this as completely unrelated, but Beth takes the syringe anyway, calling his bluff. What makes this opening brilliant is how it shows Rick's methods. He creates an elaborate scientific solution to avoid a simple human obligation. Rather than just say he doesn't want to go to therapy, he transforms his entire molecular structure. Rick would rather become a vegetable than admit he has problems worth discussing with a professional. The consequences of genius-level avoidance. Once the family leaves, Rick's plan immediately backfires. The family cat, Izzy, mistakes him for a snake and knocks him off the workbench. Rick rolls down the driveway and into the street, where he faces the harsh reality that pickles are not built for survival in the real world. The sun starts to dehydrate him, and he nearly dies from exposure before a rainstorm saves him, only to wash him down a storm drain into the sewers. This sequence represents everything wrong with Rick's approach to problems. His brilliant solution creates 10 new problems he never considered. Instead of spending an hour in therapy, he now faces death by dehydration, drowning, and whatever lives in the sewers. But rather than admit his mistake, Rick doubles down and tries to science his way out of the situation he scienced himself into. In the sewers, Rick encounters a cockroach and realizes he can use its nervous system to control movement. He bites the bug's head, exposes its brain, and uses his own saliva to interface with its neural pathways. The bug's legs respond to his tongue movements, giving him basic mobility. This scene is both disgusting and impressive, showing Rick's ability to solve problems with whatever materials he has available. The therapy sessions begin. While Rick fights for survival in the sewers, his family sits in Dr. Wong's waiting room. The therapy office details add subtle humor. There are motivational posters about courage and dedication, and they encounter Mr. Goldenfold, who apparently comes here for eating poop, which explains the strange posters about courage in eating hot dogs. Dr. Wong immediately asks about the missing grandfather, and Beth launches into a defensive explanation about Rick's important scientific work. When Morty simply says, "He turned himself into a pickle," Beth gets angry and tries to redirect the conversation toward disciplining her children rather than examining family dynamics. Dr. Wong asks a simple question that cuts to the heart of the episode: why do we think Grandpa turned himself into a pickle? This question makes Beth uncomfortable because everyone knows the answer, but admitting it means acknowledging that Rick deliberately avoided therapy. Beth's defensiveness reveals how much she protects Rick's behavior, even when it clearly hurts the family. The therapy scenes work because Dr. Wong acts like an actual therapist rather than a cartoon character. She asks direct questions, points out obvious patterns, and refuses to get pulled into the family's dysfunction. When Beth tries to deflect with racist comments about her name or complaints about her children, Dr. Wong calmly redirects back to the real issues. Rick's sewer adventure escalates. Back in the sewers, Rick's situation gets worse when rats discover him. Using his cockroach body, he kills one rat and immediately begins building more complex machinery from sewer materials. He creates an elaborate contraption that processes the rat's brain and body parts, then surgically attaches rat limbs to his pickle body while connecting the rat brain to control them. The transformation sequence shows Rick at his most resourceful and most disturbing. He builds surgical equipment from garbage, performs precise operations on himself, and emerges as a terrifying pickle rat hybrid with functioning limbs and weapons. The other rats attack him in a swarm, but Rick has prepared for this, equipping himself with wrist-mounted weapons that fire screws and X-Acto blades. What follows is essentially a one-man action movie starring a pickle. Rick systematically kills dozens of rats using improvised weapons and tactical planning. He takes on a massive alpha rat, taunting it by saying he never bothered to give it a name because it's not special. After killing the alpha rat, he upgrades his equipment again, building a jetpack and fashioning a hood from rat parts. This entire sequence is both amazing and horrible. Rick's intelligence and creativity are undeniable, but he's using these gifts to commit mass murder against sewer animals because he was too proud to attend family therapy. The episode doesn't judge whether Rick's actions are right or wrong, it just shows the ridiculous extremes he'll go to avoid admitting he has problems. The government building infiltration. Rick's jetpack carries him up through a toilet into what turns out to be a heavily guarded government building. His appearance immediately triggers security alerts, and armed agents start shooting at him. Rick tries to explain that he just needs to find an exit, but the agents are beyond reasoning with a talking pickle. The building's agency director identifies Rick as Solenia, a folklore figure known as the Pickle Man who steals children's dreams. This adds a mythical element to Rick's adventure, suggesting that his pickle form taps into something archetypal and terrifying. The agent's fear seems almost supernatural, like they're dealing with a monster from their nightmares rather than just a scientist in vegetable form. Rick uses the building's infrastructure to his advantage, traveling through air ducts and mail tubes while collecting office supplies to build weapons. In one brilliant moment, he transfers a bottle from the trash to the recycling bin, causing one agent to observe that whatever this thing is, it's shaming us. Even as a pickle, Rick can't help but judge other people's wasteful habits. The phone conversation between Rick and the agency director reveals more about Rick's personality. When told he's violated international law just by being there, Rick responds that the dead agents killed themselves by not letting him out. His logic is terrifying but consistent. Anyone who gets in his way chose their fate by opposing him. Jaguar, Rick's equal and opposite. The agency director releases his secret weapon, Jaguar, a prisoner who's been told his daughter is alive and will be freed if he kills the pickle. Jaguar represents everything Rick could be if he channeled his abilities toward protecting rather than avoiding family. Where Rick abandoned his family to become a pickle, Jaguar fights to save his daughter. The fight between Pickle Rick and Jaguar showcases two brilliant minds using improvised weapons and tactics. Rick fires lasers while Jaguar uses conventional firearms. When both get wounded, they perform field medicine using office supplies. Rick staples a pickle slice to his damaged area, while Jaguar pours gunpowder into his wound and lights it on fire to cauterize it. Their conversation during the fight reveals their philosophical differences. Jaguar says there's nothing he wouldn't do to see his daughter again, while Rick admits there's lots he wouldn't do to see his daughter. Rick's honesty about his limitations as a father makes him more disturbing than a traditional villain. He knows he's selfish, but he frames this as honesty rather than something to change. The fight ends with both warriors working together when the agency director reveals that Jaguar's daughter is already dead. This betrayal unites them against their common enemy. Jaguar helps Rick escape via helicopter, but their partnership highlights how differently they view family obligations. Dr. Wong diagnoses the real problem. While Rick fights for his life, the therapy session reveals the family's deeper issues. Dr. Wong gets each family member to admit their real feelings. Beth admits she's afraid her kids will get expelled. Summer wants to huff enamel without people assuming it's because her family sucks. Morty says he's sad that he peed in class instead of a toilet. These admissions seem small, but they represent breakthrough moments. The family has been so focused on managing Rick's chaos that they've never addressed their own needs and feelings. Wong guides them toward expressing themselves in healthy ways rather than acting out destructively. The session gets interrupted when Dr. Wong asks Beth directly what she thinks is in the syringe. When Summer and Morty both say anti-pickle serum, and Beth almost raises her hand to agree, the truth becomes undeniable. Everyone knows Rick lied to avoid therapy, but acknowledging this means confronting how Rick's behavior affects the whole family. Dr. Wong explains her theory about the family's dysfunction. Rick's intelligence and Beth's admiration for it create a dynamic that punishes emotional vulnerability. This pattern destroyed Beth's marriage and is teaching the children to misdirect their feelings rather than express them healthily. When Beth responds with "fuck you," it proves Dr. Wong's point perfectly. The climactic return. Rick crashes through Dr. Wong's door at the worst possible moment, covered in blood and still in pickle form. His entrance is perfectly timed to interrupt any real progress the family might have made. Dr. Wong treats this calmly, noting that his family holds him in high regard and that he's lucky to have them. When Beth asks Rick to tell her what's in the syringe, we get Rick's first honest moment in the episode. He admits it's serum to keep him alive, that he's had a rough day and sustained damage, and that he's close to death. When Dr. Wong asks why he lied, Rick simply says, "So I wouldn't have to come here." This honesty opens the door for Dr. Wong to ask the crucial question: why didn't he want to come to therapy? Rick's answer reveals his entire worldview. He doesn't respect therapy because he's a scientist who solves problems by changing the world rather than changing himself. He sees therapy as something for animals we eat rather than people who want to grow and improve. Dr. Wong's response is the episode's emotional climax. She explains that Rick's family uses intelligence to justify sickness, and that Rick alternates between seeing his mind as unstoppable and inescapable. The truth is that his mind is within his control, that he chose to become a pickle just like he chose to belittle her profession. Her final observation cuts deepest. Rick is dripping with rat blood and feces because his enormous mind is literally vegetating by his own hand. He would rather turn himself into a pickle and fight through sewers than do the basic maintenance work of therapy. Some people are okay going to work, she explains, while others would rather die. The aftermath and missed opportunity. After therapy, the family drives home with Rick still in pickle form. He apologizes for lying to get out of therapy, and Beth quickly forgives him. But instead of processing what Dr. Wong said, they immediately bond over mocking her as a monologuist and weird breed. This reaction shows how deeply the family's dysfunction runs. They just received a clear diagnosis of their problems from a professional, but rather than consider her insights, they dismiss her as weird for doing her job. Rick and Beth's bonding over mocking therapy proves Dr. Wong's point about how they use intelligence to avoid growth. When Rick injects the serum and transforms back to human form, his first words are, "Therapists, man." He and Beth make plans to go drinking, effectively celebrating their successful avoidance of personal growth. Summer and Morty get ignored as the adults congratulate themselves for being too smart for therapy. The episode's final line comes from Morty, who quietly says, "I liked her." This might be the only character growth in the entire episode. Morty recognizes that Dr. Wong was trying to help them, even if the adults refused to see it. The post-credits lesson. The post-credits scene shows Rick and Morty trapped in a death trap created by a villain named Concerto. Rick dramatically declares they're going to die and tells Morty to make peace with his god. Just when death seems certain, Jaguar appears and saves them, then flies away without needing thanks or recognition. Rick's final line, to "that Morty is why you don't go to therapy," perfectly captures his twisted logic. He credits his decision to avoid therapy for the chain of events that led to meeting Jaguar, who saves them months later. In Rick's mind, this proves that avoiding emotional growth leads to practical benefits. But Rick's logic is backwards. Jaguar saves them not because Rick avoided therapy, but because Rick helped Jaguar, even though it served no selfish purpose. The real lesson is that connecting with others through shared struggle creates lasting bonds. Jaguar remembers Rick's help and returns the favor when needed. Pickle Rick uses an absurd premise to explore how intelligent people avoid emotional growth. Rick's elaborate scientific solution to dodge therapy backfires spectacularly, forcing him into increasingly dangerous situations that require the very skills he's trying to avoid developing. The episode shows that using intelligence to justify avoiding problems creates bigger problems, while the simple work of therapy offers real solutions. Dr. Wong's insights about the family's dysfunction prove accurate, but the family chooses to mock her rather than grow. Rick's adventure with Jaguar demonstrates that meaningful connections come from vulnerability and mutual support, not from avoiding responsibility. The episode suggests that the smartest people often struggle most with basic human maintenance, preferring dramatic solutions to simple growth. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the Vat of Acid episode. The Vat of Acid episode, when Rick's ego destroys lives. The Vat of Acid episode stands as one of Rick and Morty's darkest explorations of how Rick's need to be right leads to genuine evil. What starts as a simple disagreement about emergency planning becomes a devastating lesson in consequences when Rick's wounded pride drives him to create a device that literally lets Morty kill infinite versions of himself. The episode shows Rick at his most manipulative and cruel, using advanced science to punish his grandson for daring to criticize one of his ideas. The setup: a simple exchange gone wrong. The episode begins with Rick and Morty arriving at what seems like a routine business meeting in an alien facility. Rick explains his backup plan with unusual detail. He's pre-scouted the location and placed a fake acid vat among the real ones, complete with air hoses and quick-release bones to fake their deaths if things go wrong. When Morty makes a face at this explanation, Rick gets defensive, asking what part of his elaborate setup isn't inventive enough. This opening reveals Rick's fundamental insecurity about his inventions. He over-explains the acid vat because he's proud of it, but Morty's skeptical expression immediately puts him on the defensive. Rick has built his entire identity around being the smartest person in the universe, so any suggestion that his ideas might be flawed threatens his core sense of self. The business meeting goes exactly as wrong as Rick predicted. The aliens reveal they brought fake crystals and guns. Rick counters that he has fake crystals and a fake arm, and when the situation escalates, Rick grabs Morty and jumps into the acid vat. The plan works perfectly. The aliens believe they're dead when the bones float up, allowing them to escape. But instead of celebrating their successful escape, the aliens spend time analyzing what they just witnessed. They're disturbed by what appeared to be Rick's willingness to kill his own grandson, discussing how it had to be 5 seconds of unparalleled torture before the bones appeared. This outside perspective shows how Rick's plan, while effective, looked genuinely psychotic to observers. Morty's criticism hits home. Back in the alien bar, Rick expects praise for his clever escape plan, but Morty delivers devastating criticism instead. He calls the acid vat a shitty idea and asks if Rick is dying of dementia. This attack on Rick's intelligence and mental capacity strikes at his deepest fears about aging and relevance. Morty's criticism escalates when he points out that Rick ruined their escape by making it unnecessarily elaborate and disturbing. He brings up Rick's other recent failures, particularly the pickle incident, noting that Rick wasn't there when Morty had his own adventure with dragons. This comparison stings because it suggests Morty can have successful adventures without Rick. The argument reveals the power dynamic shift happening in their relationship. Morty tells Rick he got cocky tonight because it was the night I saw you fail. For the first time, Morty isn't intimidated by Rick's intelligence or aggression. He's seen Rick make mistakes and realizes his grandfather isn't infallible. Rick tries to deflect with insults about Morty's English homework and atomic-age beatnik zingers, but his defensive reactions show how much the criticism hurts. When Rick declares there's no such thing as a bad idea, it's about execution. Morty calls him out on this hypocrisy, pointing out that Rick constantly dismisses Morty's ideas without consideration. The deeper conflict about ideas and recognition. Morty's real grievance isn't about the acid vat, it's about Rick's systematic dismissal of his contributions. Morty explains that he constantly pitches ideas to Rick, who treats them like they're not worth thinking about. When Rick brings up the helicopter lawn chair, Morty defends himself, but Rick dismisses it as something from TV. The conversation shifts to Morty's video game-style place-saving device, an idea that would let people save their place in time like a video game checkpoint, try different choices, then return to their save point. Rick immediately dismisses this as something he saw on Futurama, but Morty argues back that Rick doesn't do anything unless it's original. This exchange reveals Rick's creative philosophy and his contradictions. He claims he doesn't do time travel, but when Morty clarifies, it's not time travel, but saving a place in time. Rick gets frustrated that Morty doesn't understand the complexity involved. Rick's dismissal comes from his knowledge of how impossibly difficult such a device would be to create, but he can't explain this without revealing his limitations. Morty recognizes that Rick is avoiding the challenge and starts using reverse psychology, repeatedly saying, "You can't do it." Rick explains that this technique predates internet culture. It was called reverse psychology before it was called negging. And Bugs Bunny used it before incels existed. But even knowing he's being manipulated, Rick can't resist the challenge to his abilities. Rick's manipulative apology. The next morning, Rick calls Morty at 3 a.m. with an apparent confession of failure. He claims he couldn't make the device and admits he's been aggressive and unfair about rejecting Morty's ideas. Rick suggests that maybe he's lost his abilities or never had them, calling the acid vat plan evidence of his decline. This emotional manipulation is masterful in its cruelty. Rick knows exactly how to push Morty's buttons, appealing to his grandson's empathy and need for connection. He talks about being ashamed and asks for a little honesty in their relationship. Morty immediately responds with comfort and support, telling Rick he's a great inventor who just needs to work on communication. The manipulation reaches its peak when Rick threatens to just kill you before revealing he actually completed the device. His fake emotional breakdown was entirely designed to make Morty feel guilty for criticizing him while setting up the dramatic reveal of his success. Rick's celebration, "Every two helpin', I did it, you little son of a bitch," shows his true feelings about proving Morty wrong. This scene demonstrates Rick's emotional abuse tactics. He uses false vulnerability to manipulate Morty into providing comfort and reassurance, then reveals it was all fake to maximize the impact of his victory. The fact that Rick planned this entire emotional manipulation while building the device shows the calculated nature of his cruelty. The power and corruption of consequence-free living. Morty's first use of the device reveals its seductive power. When his math teacher calls on him and he's unprepared, Morty activates the device, goes back to his save point, and this time volunteers to solve the problem. But his solution involves stripping naked in class, revealing his allergic reaction to sheepskin condoms in graphic detail. The teacher's response, "Every do. Bold move, Morty Smith, but can you deliver?" becomes a running theme. Each time Morty resets and tries again, he gets bolder and more confident. The device gives him the ability to experiment without consequences, letting him take risks he would never normally attempt. The montage that follows shows Morty using the device to live out increasingly extreme fantasies. He impresses Jessica with confident conversation, engages in dangerous activities like suicide by cop, and generally behaves without regard for normal social consequences. The 80 Seconds Rock soundtrack emphasizes the feeling of unlimited power and freedom. Morty's transformation is dramatic. Jessica notices he seems different, like he finally found himself. She's attracted to this new, confident version of Morty who appears to have overcome his usual anxiety and self-doubt. For Morty, who has always struggled with confidence and social interaction, this feels like becoming the person he was meant to be. But the episode's tone during this sequence is subtly ominous. The music and editing make Morty's behavior seem cool and exciting, but there are hints of the darkness underneath. His willingness to engage in dangerous situations and his casual attitude toward potential consequences suggest something is wrong with this apparent liberation. The horrifying truth revealed. When Morty finally decides he's learned his lesson about living without consequences, Rick reveals the devastating truth. The device wasn't actually saving and reloading Morty's timeline. It was splitting reality and moving Morty into parallel dimensions where events played out differently. Every time Morty reset, he was actually abandoning his timeline and moving to a new one where a different version of himself had made different choices. But there was already a Morty in each new dimension, so Rick had to solve for that. The device was killing the alternate Mortys and taking their place. Every time Morty reset to smell Jessica's hair again or relive a satisfying moment, he was murdering another version of himself who had lived through different experiences. Rick's explanation is deliberately cruel in its detail. He compares it to The Prestige, a movie about a magician who creates duplicates of himself and kills them for his act. Rick calls Morty a greedy little junkie who has incinerated countless versions of himself for momentary pleasures. The phrase, "especially those times when Morty used the device for private moments," adds an extra layer of shame and violation. This revelation recontextualizes everything we've seen. Every moment of confidence and happiness Morty experienced came at the cost of murdering alternate versions of himself. His newfound success with Jessica, his bold classroom antics, his dangerous adventures, all of it was built on a foundation of mass murder that he was unaware he was committing. The consequences come home. Rick offers Morty a choice. He can live with the consequences of what he's done, or Rick can merge the probable realities so that only one Morty did everything, making the murdered Mortys purely theoretical. Before Morty can decide, a massive crowd arrives to arrest him. SWAT teams, drug dealers, Me Too activists, the ACLU, the AARP, the NAACP, Gamergate supporters, and even Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor. This bizarre coalition represents everyone Morty has apparently wronged during his consequence-free spree. The inclusion of opposing groups like Gamergate and Me Too activists suggests Morty's actions crossed multiple moral and political boundaries. The presence of a Supreme Court justice implies his crimes reach the highest levels of government attention. Morty's response, an "I don't want to talk about it," shows his shame and refusal to confront what he's done. Rick's stumped reaction to the crowd's size suggests even he's impressed by the scope of Morty's actions. When Rick suggests there's no way out of this one, he's setting up Morty for his final humiliation. The solution, of course, is the acid vat. Rick forces Morty to admit the vat is a good idea and even kiss it before jumping in. The crowd's reaction to Morty's apparent death shows how his actions affected people. They discuss justice versus vengeance and whether they bear some responsibility for driving him to suicide. The final manipulations and revelations. The acid vat escape works exactly as planned, but Rick has one more twist. The dimension they're in isn't their home reality. Rick reveals he wouldn't waste their real home teaching Morty a lesson. This dimension has small differences that make it slightly better. Johnny Carson is still alive, 9/11 never happened, and Rocky Road ice cream has peanut butter instead of marshmallows. Morty's horrified reaction to the ice cream change, US Pan, "The marshmallows are the best part," is both funny and deeply sad. After everything he's been through, this small difference feels like a final violation. Rick has taken him away from his real home and real Jessica, leaving him stranded in a dimension that's almost but not quite right. The episode ends with them watching the acid-proof man from their earlier encounter appearing on Johnny Carson's show. This man represents someone who actually found a way to survive acid through biological immunity rather than elaborate deception. His success feels like a mockery of Rick's complicated schemes and Morty's moral compromises. The final scene is deeply unsettling because it shows Rick's complete victory. He's proven his point about consequences, humiliated Morty for criticizing him, and stranded him in an alternate dimension as a final punishment. Rick's willingness to abandon their home reality just to teach Morty a lesson shows the depths of his narcissistic cruelty. The episode's dark message about power and abuse. The Vat of Acid episode functions as an allegory for how abusive relationships work. Rick's response to criticism follows a classic pattern: dismissal, escalation, manipulation through false vulnerability, apparent reconciliation, and then punishment disguised as education. Every step is designed to maintain Rick's power and punish Morty for challenging his authority. The device itself represents how abusers use their power to create situations where their victims unknowingly harm themselves or others. Morty thought he was exploring consequence-free fun, but Rick designed the system so that Morty's enjoyment would come at a terrible cost. The revelation that Morty was committing mass murder serves Rick's need to make him feel guilty and ashamed. Rick's final abandonment of their home dimension shows the ultimate abuse of power. 19:6, he's willing to destroy Morty's entire life just to prove a point about respecting his ideas. The fact that the new dimension is slightly better in some ways makes the punishment more psychologically complex, as Morty can't even be entirely angry about the situation. The episode also explores how trauma and guilt can be weaponized. Morty will now carry the knowledge of his unknowing mass murder for the rest of his life, making him less likely to challenge Rick in the future. Rick has created a perfect psychological prison where Morty's own actions become the bars that contain him. The Vat of Acid episode uses science fiction concepts to explore psychological abuse and manipulation. Rick's wounded ego over Morty's criticism of his acid vat plan drives him to create an elaborate revenge scheme disguised as granting Morty's wish. The reality-splitting device appears to give Morty consequence-free living, but actually forces him to unknowingly murder infinite versions of himself. When the truth is revealed, Morty faces justice from everyone he's wronged, forcing him to use Rick's original acid vat plan to escape. Rick's final revelation that this all happened in an alternate dimension serves as additional punishment for daring to criticize his ideas. The episode demonstrates how abusers use their power to create situations where victims unknowingly harm themselves, then use that guilt to maintain control and prevent future challenges to their authority. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Total Rickall. Total Rickall, when memories become weapons. Total Rickall stands as one of Rick and Morty's most clever and terrifying episodes, using the simple concept of false memories to create an atmosphere of paranoia and mistrust. The episode explores how easily our sense of reality can be manipulated when we can't trust our own memories, while delivering one of the series' most shocking endings. What starts as a hunt for alien parasites becomes a devastating examination of how we distinguish between real and fake relationships in our lives. The discovery of Uncle Steve. The episode opens with a seemingly normal family dinner interrupted by Jerry checking his email. Uncle Steve announces he's bought airline tickets to Paris as a thank you for letting him live with the family for almost a year. Everyone expresses gratitude and excitement about this generous gesture from their beloved family member, but when Rick enters and casually dumps glowing rocks in the kitchen trash, everything changes. Jerry complains about the glowing rocks, leading to Rick's typical dismissive response about Jerry's unemployed genes in his grandchildren. But when Uncle Steve tries to lighten the mood with a joke about Rick spending too much time around glowing rocks, Rick asks the crucial question, "Who the fuck are you?" This moment of confusion reveals the first crack in what seemed like a normal family dynamic. Jerry insists that Steve is his brother who has been living with them for almost a year, but Rick's confusion is genuine. When Rick shoots Steve in the head without warning, the family's horrified screams fill the room. But their horror turns to shock when Steve's body transforms into a blue and purple worm-like creature, spewing pink liquid everywhere. Rick's explanation reveals the terrifying truth about these parasites. They embed themselves in memories, using those false memories to multiply and spread across planets. Steve wasn't real. He was an alien creature that implanted memories of himself into the family's minds so he could live in their house and reproduce. The violation feels deeply personal because the memories feel completely real to everyone affected. The lockdown and Mr. Poopy Butthole's introduction. Rick immediately implements emergency protocols, sealing the house with blast shields and conducting a head count. He identifies 6 people who should be in the house: himself, Morty, Jerry, Beth, Summer, and Mr. Poopy Butthole. The casual way Rick includes Mr. Poopy Butthole in this count, and Mr. Poopy Butthole's helpful response, makes him seem like a natural part of the family unit. When Beth asks why their house has blast shields, Rick's response, "You don't want to know how many answers that question has," hints at the dangerous life Rick leads and how it affects his family. The blast shields aren't just for this emergency, they're apparently a regular necessity in the Smith household. Mr. Poopy Butthole's comment about feeling claustrophobic triggers the first false memory sequence. His recollection of getting stuck in an elevator after a Hulk musical seems completely natural and includes details that feel authentic. Jerry wore Hulk gloves and tried to punch elevator buttons harder. Beth criticized his logic. Morty needed to pee from the extra-large drinks, and Summer admitted to peeing herself on purpose. The memory includes cousin Nikki appearing to help with repairs, speaking in an exaggerated Brooklyn accent, and repeatedly saying, "I'm walking here." The family's joyful reaction to Nikki's arrival and his successful rescue creates a positive emotional association that makes the memory feel valuable and real. The multiplication begins. Back in the present, Nikki tries to convince everyone to get fresh air, suggesting they lift the lockdown. His persistence in wanting to leave, combined with his repetitive catchphrases, triggers Rick's suspicion. When Rick shoots Nikki in the shoulder rather than killing him outright, it reveals his strategy. He's testing his suspicions while still allowing for the possibility of being wrong. Nikki's transformation into a parasite confirms Rick's fears. The revelation that there are now 7 people instead of 6 means someone else isn't real, but identifying who becomes the central challenge. Rick's admission that he guessed and aimed for the shoulder shows he's not entirely certain about his method for detecting parasites. Beth's question about trusting their memories opens the floodgates for more false recollections. The mention of finding an old Nazi submarine triggers another elaborate flashback involving the family being captured by Nazis wielding the staff of Ragu Baba. The memory includes Mr. Beauregard, their apparent family butler, saving them from certain death. These flashback sequences work by creating rich, detailed scenarios that feel like genuine family adventures. The Nazi submarine memory includes character moments that seem authentic, Morty regretting asking Rick for help with history homework, Nikki's Brooklyn attitude toward Nazis, and Mr. Beauregard's heroic intervention, the emotional satisfaction of being rescued by a loyal butler, makes the memory feel precious and worth preserving. The parasite population explosion. Each new flashback introduces more characters while reinforcing the existence of previously established ones. Mr. Beauregard's presence in multiple memories makes him seem like a stable part of the family's history. The episode cleverly uses the flashback structure to multiply the parasites exponentially. Every time someone remembers a positive interaction, new characters get introduced, and established ones become more entrenched. The variety of parasites shows their adaptive nature. There's Frankenstein, who is actually Frankenstein's monster, Sleepy Gary, Photography Raptor, Pencil Vester, and many others. Each character fills a specific niche in the family's fake memories. The wise butler, the loyal friend, the helpful writing utensil, the family photographer. They've created an entire extended support network of fake relationships. Rick's growing confusion about the actual number of people in the house shows how the false memories are affecting even him. When he writes down 6 as the correct number while simultaneously counting 10 people, the contradiction reveals how deeply the parasites have infiltrated everyone's sense of reality. His inability to trust his own counting demonstrates the insidious nature of the mental invasion. The introduction of characters like Pencil Vester through casual interaction, "Where's my pencil at? Right here, Rick, use me," shows how seamlessly the parasites integrate themselves into daily life. They don't just create big dramatic memories, they establish themselves as helpful parts of mundane activities, making their presence feel natural and necessary. The photo evidence and growing suspicion. Beth's idea to check photos for hard evidence seems logical, but it only adds to the confusion. When she points out that Mr. Poopy Butthole isn't in any of her photos, he counters that she's not in any of his. This mutual absence could indicate that either could be fake or it could be explained by normal circumstances, like them not being photographers. Summer's revelation that she only has pictures with friends from school rather than family photos leads to suspicion about her magical friend Tinkles. The flashback to Summer's dream about Tinkles features an elaborate musical sequence about their friendship in Never Past Bedtime Land. The dream's fantastical nature makes it seem obviously fake, but when Tinkles appears in person, it validates Summer's claims and proves even the most outlandish memories might be real. The episode uses this uncertainty brilliantly. Just when viewers think they've identified what's real versus fake, new evidence contradicts their assumptions. Summer's friendship with a flying magical lamb should be obviously fake, but her hurt feelings about being doubted and Tinkles' actual appearance suggest that in the Rick and Morty universe, even impossible things might be genuine family experiences. Jerry and Sleepy Gary's relationship. Jerry's declaration that he knows who the real Smiths are leads to one of the episode's most shocking revelations. He identifies Sleepy Gary as Beth's husband and his best friend, completely forgetting that he himself is married to Beth. The casual way everyone accepts this relationship shows how deeply the false memories have altered their sense of family structure. Sleepy Gary's private conversation with Jerry reveals their romantic relationship. The flashback to their vacation shows them bonding over the possibility of seeing Star Wars filming, but their interaction takes an unexpected turn when they reach for the same dropped bottle. Their hands touch, leading to prolonged eye contact and eventual kissing. Jerry's question, "What are we doing?" captures the confusion of acting on implanted feelings that feel genuine. This relationship represents the most complex aspect of the parasite invasion. Jerry's memories of Sleepy Gary aren't just pleasant, they're deeply emotional and romantic. The false memories haven't just added a person to Jerry's life, they've fundamentally altered his understanding of his own identity and relationships. The fact that Jerry prioritizes his relationship with Gary over his marriage to Beth shows how completely the parasites can rewrite someone's emotional priorities. Rick's increasing paranoia. Rick's mental state deteriorates as the episode progresses. His attempt to get his watch back from Frankenstein triggers a Vietnam War flashback that he immediately recognizes as false manipulation. His violent rejection of the memory, "Get out of my head, parasite," shows his awareness that the memories are weapons being used against him. When Frankenstein temporarily gets Rick's gun, the power dynamic shifts dramatically. Rick's declaration that he might be the only real person on Earth reveals the depth of his isolation and paranoia. The possibility that everyone he cares about might be fake parasites forces him to confront his deepest fears about connection and trust. Reverse Giraffe's speech turns the suspicion back on Rick himself. The accusation that Rick is the real deceiver, keeping everyone prisoner while encouraging mistrust, sounds plausible given Rick's typical behavior. The claim that a mad scientist inventor with a flying car showing up after years away sounds like exactly the kind of implausible story a parasite would create. The group's analysis of Rick's catchphrases makes them sound obviously fake when listed together. Wubba lubba dub dub, Ricky Ticky Tavi, and Lick 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 My Balls do seem like randomly generated nonsense rather than natural expressions. Even Rick's vague backstory about being Beth's father gets questioned, as if the simple claim of family relationship isn't enough evidence of authenticity. Morty's breakthrough discovery. Morty's confrontation with Rick in the garage provides the episode's crucial breakthrough. When Rick responds to Morty's threats with genuine hostility, calling him a whiny little piece of shit, and recounting about 1,000 memories where about 6 of them are pleasant. The key insight is that parasites can only create pleasant memories. They're unable to generate the complex mix of positive and negative experiences that characterize real relationships. Rick's ability to be genuinely cruel to Morty and Morty's abundance of negative memories about Rick proves their relationship is authentic precisely because it's difficult and painful. This revelation reframes the entire episode. The warmth and positivity that made characters like Mr. Beauregard and Pencilvester seem so lovable was actually the signature of their artificial nature. Real relationships include disappointment, frustration, and conflict alongside love and support. The parasite's inability to create negative memories becomes their fatal flaw. The montage of Morty's bad memories with Rick shows genuine trauma, Rick abandoning him in dangerous situations, Rick's dismissive treatment, Rick's selfishness and cruelty. But these painful experiences prove their relationship is real in a way that purely positive memories never could. The episode suggests that difficulty and pain are essential components of authentic human connection. The mass extermination. Once the family understands how to identify parasites, the systematic killing begins. Rick's wall of weapons suggests he's prepared for exactly this kind of situation, though the specific threat of memory parasites is presumably rare enough that he needed time to figure out their weakness. Each character gets tested through negative memories. Summer's reality gets confirmed through her memory of kicking Morty in the groin and her anger about him never going in her room. The casual cruelty of siblings provides evidence of authentic family relationships. Similarly, Beth's reality gets confirmed through Summer's memory of being accidentally hit with a wine bottle on picture day, showing Beth's struggles with alcohol and parenting. The rapid elimination of parasites once the family knows what to look for shows how vulnerable the creatures become once their deception is exposed. Characters like Mrs. Refrigerator try to argue they have negative memories, but their examples don't qualify as genuinely unpleasant experiences. A thrilling roller coaster ride isn't the same as genuine interpersonal conflict or disappointment. The violence of the extermination sequence contrasts sharply with the warm, positive memories the parasites created. The family that seemed so much larger and more loving gets systematically reduced to its core members through brutal necessity. The episode shows how the illusion of expanded family and friendship can be appealing enough that losing it feels like genuine loss, even when it was never real. The tragic error. The episode's most shocking moment comes when Beth shoots Mr. Poopy Butthole, assuming he must be a parasite since only the core family should remain. Mr. Poopy Butthole's agonized reaction, bleeding, screaming, asking why, immediately reveals that he was real all along. His genuine pain and confusion show that he was never a threat. This mistake recontextualizes everything about Mr. Poopy Butthole's role in the episode. His helpfulness during the crisis, his positive memories with the family, and his casual inclusion in Rick's headcount all seem suspicious in retrospect. But they were actually signs of his authentic place in the family. The episode reveals that it's possible to have purely positive relationships with real people, but this possibility becomes a trap when you're trying to identify fake ones. Beth's horror at realizing her mistake shows the psychological cost of the parasite invasion. The experience has forced the family to become suspicious of love and kindness, turning positive emotions into potential threats. The fact that they successfully eliminated all the actual parasites but also wounded a real family member shows how the invasion's psychological damage extends beyond the immediate threat. Mr. Poopy Butthole's forgiveness, expressed through his decision not to press charges, demonstrates genuine character in a way that the parasites never could. His sadness about Beth not having bad memories of him shows his understanding of the situation while still acknowledging the pain it caused. His request to be left alone suggests that even real relationships can be damaged by traumatic misunderstandings. The aftermath and lasting damage. The hospital scene reveals the long-term consequences of the invasion. Mr. Poopy Butthole's physical therapy shows he survived but was genuinely hurt. His request for solitude and his message that Beth should leave if she loves him demonstrates how the incident damaged their relationship despite his forgiveness. Rick's attempt to comfort Beth by mentioning his own similar mistake on a planetary scale hints at other catastrophic errors in his past. The casual way he references destroying an entire planet suggests this kind of collateral damage is unfortunately common in his life, but that doesn't make Beth's mistake less painful for her. The family's walk away from the hospital shows them reduced to their core members: Rick, Beth, Jerry, Summer, and Morty. They've eliminated all the parasites and saved Earth from invasion, but they've also lost the expanded sense of family and friendship the false memories provided. The house will feel emptier now, and positive memories will always carry the suspicion of being artificially implanted. Jerry and Beth's situation is particularly complex because Jerry's romantic relationship with Sleepy Gary, while based on false memories, felt genuine to him. Beth's comment about needing time to forget about Sleepy Gary, and Jerry's agreement, suggests that false emotions can have real psychological effects even after their artificial origin is revealed. The episode's deeper themes. Total Recall explores how memories shape identity and relationships. The Parasite's strategy of creating positive false memories shows how our sense of who we love and why we love them depends on accumulated experiences. When those experiences are artificial, it raises questions about the nature of emotional bonds and family connections. The episode also examines the relationship between love and conflict. The revelation that negative memories prove authenticity suggests that real relationships require friction and disappointment alongside affection. The parasite's inability to create anything but pleasant memories makes them ultimately hollow, even if their positive emotions feel genuine in the moment. The story serves as a metaphor for how false narratives can infiltrate communities and families. The parasites spread through shared positive memories, creating a false sense of expanded belonging that feels more appealing than reality. The process of elimination requires painful honesty about the negative aspects of real relationships, which can feel cruel but is necessary for distinguishing truth from manipulation. The episode's structure, with its multiple flashbacks and expanding cast, mirrors how false memories might actually spread. Each new positive recollection introduces more fictional elements while making previously established false elements seem more credible. The viewers experience the same confusion as the characters about what's real and what's fabricated. Total Recall uses the concept of memory-implanting parasites to explore themes of family, identity, and the nature of authentic relationships. The aliens create false positive memories to integrate themselves into the Smith family, multiplying rapidly until the house is filled with beloved but artificial characters. The family's struggle to identify real versus fake relationships reveals that genuine connections require both positive and negative experiences, while purely pleasant memories indicate artificial manipulation. Morty's realization that parasites can only create good memories leads to a systematic elimination of the invaders, but the process also results in Beth accidentally shooting the real Mr. Poopy Butthole. The episode demonstrates how false narratives can feel more appealing than reality, while showing that authentic relationships must include conflict and disappointment alongside love and support. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to The Wedding Squanchers. The Wedding Squanchers, when everything falls apart. The Wedding Squanchers serves as Rick and Morty's most devastating season finale, completely destroying the show's status quo in under 20 minutes. What begins as a simple wedding invitation becomes a catastrophic betrayal that tears apart Rick's life and forces his family into exile. The episode shows how quickly everything can collapse when trust is broken, while exploring themes of sacrifice, loyalty, and the true cost of loving someone who lives dangerously. The morning that changes everything. The episode opens with the Smith family sharing breakfast, establishing their normal routine before everything gets destroyed. Jerry's advice about keeping cereal 70% above the milk and Beth's blunt response to "get a job" show their typical marital dynamic. Rick's casual cruelty about Jerry being the man of the house who doesn't have a job demonstrates the family's established patterns of interaction. The arrival of the courier flap immediately signals that this won't be an ordinary day. Summer's disgusted reaction to the brain-like delivery mechanism contrasts with Rick's casual explanation that it's like the intergalactic version of UPS but less off-putting. This comparison highlights how Rick's lifestyle constantly brings alien elements into his family's suburban existence. Rick's excitement about receiving an egg bite from Bird Person reveals genuine joy, a rare emotion for someone usually detached from others. His warning about not spoiling that Braveheart wins the Oscar shows his consideration for his friend's experience, suggesting depth to their relationship beyond Rick's typical selfishness. The holographic invitation featuring Bird Person and Tammy announcing their mate melding ceremony immediately triggers Rick's disgust. His visceral reaction to seeing them together, throwing a napkin over the hologram and disposing of it, reveals how much the relationship disturbs him. Tammy's clarification that for non-birds, this means marriage, adds humor while setting up the episode's central conflict. Family pressure and reluctant participation. Summer's excitement about her friend marrying Rick's best friend creates immediate pressure for attendance. Jerry's confused question about what a bird person is shows how disconnected he remains from Rick's world, despite living with the consequences of Rick's adventures for months. Rick's declaration that weddings are basically funerals with cake reveals his cynical view of commitment and marriage. His comparison to watching Jerry throw his life away adds typical cruelty while expressing genuine distaste for witnessing someone he cares about make what he considers a mistake. The courier flap's misunderstanding of Rick's dismissive comments leads to Jerry getting literally shipped to the wedding. The machine's interpretation of "I'd hang out with Jerry all day" as shipping instructions provides dark comedy while forcing the family's hand. Beth's horror at Jerry's disappearance and Rick's casual explanation that he's probably been sent 6,000 light-years across the galaxy shows how Rick's world constantly endangers his family through simple misunderstandings. Rick's resigned admission that now we have to go to the wedding reveals his recognition that family obligations sometimes override personal preferences. Despite his distaste for the ceremony, he won't abandon Jerry or let his family suffer for his avoidance of uncomfortable social situations. Planet Squanch and cultural confusion. The family's arrival on Planet Squanch introduces Squanchy, who greets Rick as a psycho bag of squanch. This affectionate insult suggests a long friendship between characters who understand each other's violent natures. Squanchy's formal greeting to Beth and his explanation of Squanch culture being more contextual than literal attempts to help her navigate alien social customs. Beth's innocent attempt to say she squanches her family creates immediate horror from Rick and Squanchy. Her repeated attempts, despite their obvious discomfort, shows her determination to fit in, but also highlights how dangerous cultural misunderstandings can be when you don't understand context. Rick's explanation that "you just say what's in your squanch and people understand" suggests Beth accidentally said something deeply inappropriate about her family relationships. The wedding reception showcases the diversity of Rick's criminal associates. The photography, Cyborg's awkward attempts to take candid shots while announcing his intentions provides comic relief while showing how different species handle social customs. The plant-like guest's fainting reaction to being served plant food demonstrates the complexity of catering to diverse alien dietary needs. Jerry's presence at the reception, apparently unharmed by his shipping experience, allows the family to reunite and participate in the celebration. His survival suggests that despite Rick's chaotic lifestyle, his criminal network generally protects family members, even ones Rick finds annoying. Rick's emotional speech and Tammy's revelation. Rick's wedding speech represents a rare moment of genuine emotional vulnerability. His declaration that Bird Person is his best friend and his commitment to loving Tammy because Bird Person loves her shows real growth in his capacity for connection. The speech about opening myself up to others suggests Rick is trying to overcome his typical emotional isolation. The positive reception to Rick's speech, with applause and Squanchy symbolically throwing away his Rick's best friends forever collar, shows how much his criminal associates value seeing him express genuine emotion. These hardened criminals appreciate witnessing their friends' attempt at emotional growth, suggesting their relationships run deeper than just professional cooperation. Tammy's response begins normally, acknowledging the strangeness of a high school senior from Earth marrying a 40-year-old bird person. Her self-aware humor about the unusual relationship helps the audience relate to her perspective while building trust before her devastating revelation. The shift in Tammy's tone when she reveals her true identity as a deep-cover agent for the Galactic Federation transforms the entire scene. Her calm explanation that the wedding guests are wanted criminals and the building is surrounded shows how thoroughly she's planned this operation. Her casual delivery makes the betrayal more chilling than if she'd been obviously villainous from the start. Beth's confusion about the metaphor and Jerry's promise to explain it later provides dark humor while showing how the family still doesn't fully understand the criminal nature of Rick's lifestyle. They're witnessing their father divided by grandfather's world collapse, but can't immediately grasp the implications. The massacre and escape. Tammy's order for everyone to sit down and her demand that bird person sit your bird ass down shows her complete transformation from sweet high school student to ruthless federal agent. Bird person's confused repetition of her name reveals his genuine shock at the betrayal by someone he trusted completely. Tammy's execution of Bird Person represents the episode's emotional climax. Her cold-blooded murder of someone who loved and trusted her demonstrates the depth of her deception and the ruthlessness of the Galactic Federation. Bird Person's final caw sounds become heartbreaking rather than silly, marking the death of Rick's closest friend. Rick's anguished scream of "No!" shows genuine grief and rage. This raw emotional response contrasts sharply with his usual detached cynicism, revealing how much Bird Person meant to him. The loss of his best friend represents not just personal tragedy, but the destruction of Rick's criminal support network. Squanchy's immediate violent response to the betrayal shows the loyalty among Rick's associates. His transformation into a more aggressive form and his battle cry about giving agents a taste of my squanch demonstrates his willingness to die protecting his friends. The criminal network's instant shift into combat mode reveals their preparedness for exactly this kind of betrayal. The chaotic firefight that follows shows the wedding guests weren't just criminals but experienced fighters. Their quick response to Tammy's trap suggests they've survived similar situations before. The Smith family's terror during the battle highlights how unprepared they are for the violent realities of Rick's criminal lifestyle. Life in exile and family tensions. The family's exile on a primitive planet called Dwarf Terrace 9 shows the immediate consequences of association with Rick. Their reduced circumstances, H-1070C, living in a simple hut, wearing basic clothing, struggling with alien food sources, contrast sharply with their previous suburban comfort. The harsh environment emphasizes how Rick's lifestyle has destroyed their normal existence. Jerry's proposal to turn Rick into the government reveals his fundamental misunderstanding of their situation and his prioritization of personal comfort over family loyalty. His argument that they're suffering for someone that would never do anything for anyone but himself shows his resentment of Rick while ignoring how Rick has repeatedly risked himself to protect the family. The family's unanimous rejection of Jerry's proposal, M6M, except for Jerry himself, demonstrates their understanding that abandoning Rick would be morally wrong regardless of the consequences. Summer's explanation that you don't love people in hopes of a reward and that love should be unconditional shows emotional maturity beyond her years. Beth's angry revelation that she doesn't want Rick to leave again provides crucial backstory about Rick's previous abandonment of the family. Her fear of losing him a second time explains her willingness to endure exile rather than risk him disappearing. This admission shows how Rick's past abandonment created lasting trauma that affects the family's current decisions. Jerry's frustrated question about whether they'll do whatever Rick wants whenever he wants for the rest of their lives gets an immediate yes from everyone else. This unanimous response shows how completely the family has accepted the costs of loving Rick, even when those costs include exile, danger, and hardship. Rick's sacrifice and surrender. Rick's announcement about going to get ice cream initially seems like typical Rick behavior, casual departure without explanation. Morty's anxious questions about whether Rick is leaving permanently reveal the family's ongoing fear of abandonment. Rick's logical explanation that you can't have gotten ice cream if you don't come back provides reassurance while avoiding direct promises. Morty's ultimatum that Rick will break Mom's heart if he leaves permanently and his threat to never forgive Rick for that pain shows remarkable emotional intelligence. Morty understands that while he can handle Rick's departure, Beth's fragile emotional state makes abandonment cruel and destructive. Rick's phone call to the Galactic Federation, pretending to be Jerry Smith reporting Rick's location, shows his decision to sacrifice himself for his family's safety. His crude addition about sucking big, sweaty boners and licking disgusting and furry testicle sacs ensures Jerry will be embarrassed but not seriously harmed when the call is traced back to him. The scene of Rick drinking alone at the Plim Plom Tavern while hurt by 9 Inch Nails plays shows his emotional devastation. His examination of a photo showing happier times with his criminal friends emphasizes what he's lost. Dropping the photo and leaving money on the table suggests he's saying goodbye to his old life entirely. Rick's surrender to the Gromflamite soldiers outside the tavern represents complete capitulation. His decision to give himself up rather than fight or flee shows his acceptance that his criminal lifestyle has become unsustainable. The sacrifice protects his family while ending the life he's built with his criminal associates. The New World Order. The family's return to Earth under Galactic Federation control shows how completely their world has changed. The casual processing of their return, including DNA sampling and documentation, demonstrates the efficiency of the Federation's occupation. Jerry's cheerful cooperation contrasts with the rest of the family's obvious distress. The robot's prescription of antidepressants for Jerry's distress and the immediate assignment of debt and employment shows how the Federation controls populations through pharmaceutical dependency and economic obligation. Jerry's instant relief from the pills and excitement about getting a job reveals his susceptibility to authoritarian control systems. The Federation's transformation of Earth into a compliant member planet happens with disturbing efficiency. The systematic processing of returning citizens, the automated pharmaceutical distribution, and the immediate assignment of economic obligations show how quickly democratic societies can be absorbed into authoritarian systems. Jerry's celebration of his new job while carrying Beth in excitement provides dark irony. His joy at having purpose and employment under an occupying force contrasts with his family's understanding that their freedom has been completely eliminated. His adaptation to authoritarian rule reveals his fundamental preference for security over liberty. Rick's incarceration and the price of everything. Rick's processing through the Federation prison system shows the thoroughness of their criminal justice apparatus. The photography cyborg's mugshot procedure and the DNA sampling demonstrate how the Federation catalogs and controls their prisoners. Rick's classification as having committed everything suggests his crimes span the entire spectrum of galactic law. The maximum security cell's isolation and the presence of other dangerous prisoners shows the Federation's recognition of Rick's threat level. His placement among the galaxy's most dangerous criminals acknowledges his reputation while ensuring he can't escape or coordinate resistance efforts. Rick's simple answer of everything when asked what he's in for demonstrates both his acceptance of responsibility and his recognition that his crimes are too numerous to catalog. This admission shows character growth, not teen Rick acknowledging the full scope of his destructive behavior rather than deflecting or minimizing his actions. The final shot of Rick alone in his cell while Hurt continues to play emphasizes his complete isolation. The destruction of his criminal network, the loss of his best friend, and his separation from his family represent total defeat. His sacrifice has saved his family but cost him everything that gave his life meaning. Mr. Poopy Butthole's post-credits commentary. Mr. Poopy Butthole's appearance in the post-credits scene provides meta-commentary on the episode's devastating conclusion while showing the long-term consequences of the family's past mistakes. His ongoing recovery from Beth shooting him in total Rickall demonstrates how traumatic events continue affecting characters beyond their immediate episodes. His obvious pain medication dependency and emotional instability show how the family's paranoia about parasites created lasting damage to genuine relationships. His desperate attempts to discuss the show's events with the pizza delivery man reveal his isolation and need for connection, made worse by his traumatic experience with the family. The pizza delivery man's confusion and eventual assault of Mr. Poopy Butthole shows how his trauma has affected his ability to function in normal social situations. His inability to distinguish between people who understand his references and those who don't suggests ongoing psychological damage from his shooting. Mr. Poopy Butthole's prediction that the show will return in like a year and a half or longer provides real-world commentary on production schedules while maintaining the fiction that he's a character within the show's universe. His final "ooh-wee" delivered while lying injured on the floor encapsulates the episode's theme of maintaining hope despite devastating circumstances. The Wedding Squanchers demolishes Rick and Morty's established world through betrayal, loss, and sacrifice. Tammy's revelation as a federal agent and murder of Bird Person destroys Rick's criminal network while forcing his family into exile. Rick's ultimate surrender to protect his family shows character growth but costs him everything he values. The episode explores how loyalty and love require sacrifice, while demonstrating that even the smartest person in the universe cannot protect everyone he cares about from the consequences of his choices. The Federation's efficient conquest of Earth and Rick's imprisonment represent total defeat, setting up future seasons while showing that actions have permanent, devastating consequences that cannot always be undone through science or cleverness. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Murai Jack stands as Rick and Morty's most explosive finale, systematically destroying the show's central mythology while revealing the true horror of Rick's universe. What begins as Rick trying to fix Morty's aging problem becomes a devastating expose of how the Citadel operates as a machine designed to manufacture suffering. The episode pulls back the curtain on Rick's entire existence, showing how even infinite genius becomes a prison when you build walls around infinity itself. The Crow-Rick diversion and Morty's manipulation. The episode opens with an elaborate anime-style sequence showing Rick as Crow Rick, a mystical warrior fighting anthropomorphic owls in a Japanese-inspired setting. His dramatic costume, magical powers, and loyal crow companions create an impressive fantasy adventure that feels completely removed from the show's usual sci-fi elements. The aesthetic is gorgeous but deliberately over the top, suggesting this represents Rick escaping into fantasy rather than confronting reality. When Morty appears in the crowd watching Rick's battle, his awkward greeting reveals the emotional distance that has grown between them. Rick's casual dismissal of Morty's attempt at conversation, combined with his explanation that the battle for crows is kinda never-ending, shows how Rick has used this fantasy world to avoid dealing with real relationships and responsibilities. Morty's observation that the endless battle seems pointless strikes at the heart of Rick's escapism. His immediate backtrack and claim that it came out wrong shows Morty's desperate desire to reconnect with Rick without triggering another abandonment. The conversation reveals how much both characters have changed, Rick hiding in fantasy adventures while Morty has learned to walk on eggshells around his grandfather's emotional fragility. The anime opening sequence and title card reading Rick and Two Crows emphasize how completely Rick has replaced his family with fantasy companions. The elaborate production values and dramatic music suggest Rick has invested serious time and energy into this escapist world, treating it with the same attention he once gave to scientific adventures with Morty. The bar confrontation and Morty's aging revelation. Rick's search for Crow Scare at the bar shows him still operating within his fantasy framework, demanding information through intimidation and violence. His casual threat to kill an extra asshole to get his steps in reveals how completely he's embraced this violent persona as an escape from emotional complexity. The fight with Pussifer demonstrates Rick's combat skills within this fantasy world, but when he uses the log substitution technique, it becomes clear this isn't just role-playing. Rick has developed genuine magical abilities through his commitment to this alternate identity. His successful defeat of the Tiger Warrior shows his competence, but the arrival of middle-aged Morty shatters the fantasy entirely. Morty's transformation into a 40-year-old man creates immediate shock and confusion. His balding, weight gain, stubble, and obvious exhaustion show the physical toll of aging, but more importantly, his bitter tone reveals emotional damage from years of abandonment. His explanation that that's how long it's been, Rick forces Rick to confront the consequences of his escapism. The casual way Rick suggests they have a drink together shows his attempt to normalize the situation, but Morty's order of a rum and coke triggers the waiter's dismissive comment about him acting 20. This interaction highlights the absurdity of Morty's situation. He's aged into middle age but retains the emotional patterns of his teenage self. Morty's detailed update about their family reveals the depth of Rick's abandonment. Jerry's stage 4 illness, Summer's marriage to a junkie, and her career as pretty much a nurse show how the family has struggled and compromised in Rick's absence. His bitter comment that "you would have loved it" about Jerry's cancer reveals Morty's resentment about Rick missing even the vindication he would have enjoyed. The uncomfortable truth about Rick's relationships. Morty's ultimatum that "this may be the last time you lay eyes on me" forces Rick to choose between his fantasy life and his family relationships. Rick's response that Morty looks like shit and this isn't how he wants to remember him reveals his fundamental selfishness, even when confronted with Morty's pain. Rick's primary concern is preserving his own positive memories. Rick's discovery that the two crows have been secretly meeting with Crow Scare destroys his understanding of his fantasy relationships. The revelation that Crowscare was adventuring with the crows before Rick came along reframes their entire dynamic. Rick wasn't the hero of this story, he was the third wheel who disrupted an existing relationship. The sight of 3 toothbrushes in Crowscare's bathroom and the crow's explanation that Rick was using them as a rebound while they were using him as a rebound too shows how shallow all these relationships were. Everyone involved was trying to fill an emotional void rather than building genuine connections. Crowscare's revelation that their relationship involves physical intimacy, we immensely enjoy each other's bodies, provides the final humiliation for Rick. His disgusted reaction to witnessing their sexual relationship shows how completely he misunderstood the nature of their connection. He thought he was part of an adventuring team when he was actually interrupting a romantic relationship. The return home and family dynamics. Rick's decision to burn his Crow Rick equipment and give Crowhorse free will represents his attempt to cleanly end his fantasy life. However, Crowhorse's immediate transformation into a violent threat with cries of "Submit to Crowhorse" shows how Rick's creations often become dangerous when given independence. The off-screen explosions and screaming suggest Rick's irresponsible approach to problem-solving continues, even when he's trying to make amends. The family's reaction to Rick's return reveals the complex dynamics of his relationships. Jerry's surprise that Rick is alive, combined with Beth's immediate request to make Morty 14 again, shows how Rick's presence creates both relief and immediate demands for him to fix problems he didn't directly cause. Morty's admission about using aging serum to emotionally blackmail Rick shows how much he's learned about manipulation during his time away. His desperate desire to reconnect has led him to use Rick's own tactics of deception and emotional manipulation. This role reversal demonstrates how Rick's influence has corrupted Morty's approach to relationships. Beth's insistence that Morty demand respect rather than just accepting a reset reveals her understanding of healthy relationship dynamics. Her recognition that Morty deserves better treatment shows character growth, but Morty's refusal because he's desperate to get back together shows how Rick's abandonment has created codependency. Summer's desire for 40-year-old Morty to continue buying her friends, Molly provides dark humor while showing how the family has adapted to dysfunction. Her declaration that she'd rather throw my vote away than use it to support a flawed system applies voting logic to family decisions, suggesting she's developed sophisticated ways to avoid taking responsibility for difficult choices. The Citadel's transformation and President Morty. The Citadel's transformation into a brighter, more corporate environment with the mascot Andy represents how evil Morty has consolidated power. The forced cheerfulness of Rick's Andy Mortys shows how authoritarian regimes use mandatory positivity to suppress dissent. The slogan "Stupidity makes Morty's disgusted dumb" response perfectly reasonable. Rick's observation that the Citadel has been rebuilt and made nicer contrasts with Morty's assessment that they made it Glendale. This comparison to a bland suburban city suggests the Citadel has lost its dangerous edge and become generic and corporate. Rick's confusion about what happened reveals how completely he's been disconnected from consequences of his past actions. The Rebuild a Morty shop represents the commercialization of identity and aging. The employee's casual explanation of breaking Morty's age like a bone and removing the middle section shows how the Citadel treats Morty's fundamental identity as a commodity to be manipulated. The process literally breaking every bone in his body demonstrates the violence underlying seemingly helpful services. The creation of 2 7-year-old Mortys who are then merged back together shows the artificial nature of identity construction in the Citadel. Their innocent comments about liking crayons and thinking girls are gross highlight how the aging process has been mechanized and stripped of natural development. The emergence of adult Morty as a byproduct of the age removal creates an immediate ethical dilemma. His declaration that he's almost ready to sell out suggests this version represents Morty's potential future cynicism and compromise. His existence as waste product reveals how the Citadel disposes of inconvenient versions of people. The police state and systematic oppression. The confrontation between deformed Morty and the police reveals the oppressive nature of the Citadel's new order. Deformed Morty's message about death coming for us all and the Citadel being a weapon of mass destruction gets cut off by police violence, showing how dissent is silenced before it can spread dangerous ideas. Adult Morty's attempt to help by tackling the police shows his instinctive opposition to injustice, but his immediate execution demonstrates how quickly the system eliminates threats. His question about whether he was influential and Morty's response about his 7 blogs provides dark humor while highlighting how meaningless most resistance efforts become. The arrival of Secret Service agents to escort Rick and Morty to dinner with President Morty shows the efficiency of the surveillance state. Their knowledge of Rick's location and activities demonstrates comprehensive monitoring, while the polite invitation masks the coercive nature of the request. Rick's pardoning for destroying the Citadel reveals how evil Morty has consolidated power by appearing magnanimous while actually controlling all outcomes. The gesture of forgiveness serves his agenda by bringing Rick close enough to extract the information he needs. The dinner trap and brain scanning. President Morty's casual demeanor during dinner masks his methodical execution of a long-term plan. His comment about moving your schedule around for Rick shows false flattery designed to make Rick feel important and valued. His joke about not being there to blow the place up again provides misdirection while he prepares to extract Rick's memories. The revelation that Rick practically built this place recontextualizes the entire Citadel as Rick's creation being used against him. President Morty's manipulation of Rick's ego through praise for his legendary status demonstrates sophisticated psychological manipulation designed to keep Rick engaged long enough to complete the brain scan. Rick's mention of deformed Mortys coming up through the sewer lines talking about hope and change reveals his awareness that something is wrong with the Citadel's current operation. President Morty's acknowledgement that he has a little project going on with acquired hands-on labor hints at the slave labor operation powering his plan. The brain scanning device emerging from the table shows the elaborate preparation for this encounter. President Morty's explanation that most of Rick's brain was scanned a long time ago references the Evil Rick episode, revealing how long this plan has been in development. The Stan Lee cameo telling viewers to check Season 1 Episode 9 provides meta-commentary while acknowledging the show's continuity. President Morty's casual revelation that he was afraid I'd have to kill every Rick on the Citadel to get what I needed shows his willingness to commit genocide for his goals. His efficiency in preferring to extract information rather than commit mass murder reveals pragmatic evil rather than sadistic evil. The truth about Morty manufacturing. The memory injection showing Morty the truth about Rick and Morty relationships destroys everything Morty believed about his identity and agency. The revelation that Ricks actively manipulate Jerry and Beth relationships to produce Mortys shows how thoroughly their lives have been controlled by outside forces. The scenes of Ricks using love serums to force Jerry and Beth together reveal the artificial nature of their relationship. The image of teenage Jerry and Beth being shot with darts and immediately bonding shows how their entire romantic history was manufactured to produce Morty. This revelation retroactively recontextualizes every family dynamic as potentially artificial. The Morty cloning facility represents the industrialization of identity and family relationships. The images of naked Mortys in cages being processed like livestock shows the dehumanizing efficiency of the operation. The memory implantation process that gives cloned Mortys false histories shows how identity itself becomes a manufactured commodity. President Morty's explanation that there aren't infinite versions of our grandfather reveals the central lie of the show's premise. Rick isn't truly infinite, he's an infinite smear of one shitty old man attached to Morty's through his weakness and our forgiveness. This reframes Rick's intelligence as ultimately serving his emotional neediness rather than any higher purpose. The visual representation of the central finite curve as a yellow boundary separating Rick universes from everything else shows how Rick has literally walled off infinity to maintain his status as the smartest man in his limited domain. This revelation makes Rick's genius seem small and insecure rather than impressive. Rick's backstory and the portal gun creation. Morty's decision to scan Rick's brain despite the dangerous circumstances shows his desperate need for truth after a lifetime of lies and manipulation. Rick's frustrated consent, "Here's my fucking downloaded brain, Morty," reveals his exhaustion with hiding his past while dreading the emotional consequences of revelation. The flashback to Rick's actual origin story shows him as a grieving widower whose family was murdered by another Rick. This revelation recontextualizes Rick's cynicism and emotional detachment as trauma responses rather than inherent personality traits. His motivation to invent the portal gun came from a desire for revenge, not scientific curiosity. The montage of Rick's years spent hunting for his family's killer shows him becoming the monster he initially opposed. His methodical murder of alternate Ricks in his quest for vengeance demonstrates how trauma can transform victims into perpetrators. His failure to find his target, Rick, shows the futility of his revenge quest. Rick's eventual exhaustion and descent into alcoholism shows the psychological cost of his murder spree. His decision to build the Citadel represents a truce born of weariness rather than genuine reconciliation. The Citadel becomes a monument to Rick's failure to process his trauma in healthy ways. The final scene of Rick reuniting with a tearful Beth in his target Rick's dimension shows him choosing replacement family over continued revenge. However, his decision to stay in that dimension means he's living a lie. Now the Beth and family he's protecting aren't actually his. This adds another layer of tragedy to his relationships with the Smith family. Evil Morty's grand plan and escape. Evil Morty's revelation about the central finite curve shows the episode's central metaphor about toxic masculinity and arrested development. His description of all Ricks as victims of themselves who refuse to take responsibility reveals the systematic nature of Rick's dysfunction across infinite dimensions. The hologram showing various Ricks tormenting their Mortys demonstrates how Rick's cruelty isn't an exception but a universal constant within the curve. Images of psychopathic Ricks, violent Ricks, and drunk Ricks show that Rick's specific traumas have created consistent patterns of abuse across all versions. Evil Morty's explanation that he's leaving rather than trying to fix the system shows his recognition that some problems can't be solved from within. His description of being evil simply for being sick of him reframes rebellion against toxic authority as necessary rather than immoral. The revelation that anyone who gets sick of Rick becomes evil too suggests that healthy boundaries and self-preservation are pathologized within Rick's system. Evil Morty's escape represents choosing mental health over loyalty to dysfunction. The Citadel's destruction and Operation Phoenix. The hacking of the Citadel's portal supply creates immediate chaos as every escape route becomes a death trap. The various gruesome deaths from portal malfunctions show how quickly safety systems can become murder weapons when controlled by hostile forces. The news anchor's declaration to eat shit, fuck you before his own death shows how desperate the situation has become. The revelation of the portal fluid mines powered by enslaved, deformed Mortys shows the literal foundation of the Citadel's power structure. These Mortys represent the underclass whose suffering enables the comfortable lives of privileged Ricks and Mortys above ground. Operation Phoenix's transformation from resurrection system to power source shows how salvation mechanisms become exploitation tools under evil Morty's control. The endless cycle of Ricks and Mortys being killed and resurrected to power the dimensional drive demonstrates systematic murder on an industrial scale. Rick's admission that he doesn't have a real plan shows his recognition that evil Morty has outmaneuvered him completely. His advice for Morty to go with evil Morty represents the first time Rick has admitted defeat and prioritized Morty's survival over his own ego. Evil Morty's revelation that the second seat is a toilet shows his continued cruelty even when offering apparent mercy. His casual admission of this deception demonstrates how completely he's abandoned any pretense of caring about other people's dignity. The final escape and curve destruction. Rick and Morty's escape to Mortyburg with the deformed Mortys represents a last-ditch effort to save something from the Citadel's destruction. The separation of Mortyburg from the main Citadel shows Rick finally prioritizing the most vulnerable victims over the power structures that enabled their oppression. The activation of Mortyburg's boosters requiring partnership between Rick and Morty symbolizes how their relationship must become collaborative rather than hierarchical to survive. Their joint effort to escape the collapsing curve represents growth in their dynamic. Evil Morty's successful passage through the breach in the central finite curve represents the first genuine escape from Rick's influence in the show's history. His use of a golden portal gun suggests he's accessed technology beyond Rick's understanding or control. The destruction of the Citadel and the breach in the curve represent the end of Rick's ability to maintain his artificial superiority. The explosion that destroys the main body while allowing Mortyburg to escape suggests that salvation comes through protecting the vulnerable rather than preserving power structures. Mr. Poopy Butthole's reflection on truth and love. The post-credits scene with Mr. Poopy Butthole provides a meditation on the themes raised by the episode's main plot. His reflection on whether there's an evil me out there connects to the episode's exploration of how everyone becomes evil when they reject toxic systems. His confession about losing his university job and isolating himself from Amy shows how trauma creates cycles of self-destruction. His recognition that he stopped sharing his feelings because he wanted her to love who she thought I was, not who I felt myself becoming, reveals the central tragedy of hiding authentic self from loved ones. His observation about how horrified the people we love would be if they found out who we truly are connects to Rick's lifelong pattern of hiding his trauma and true motivations from his family. The universal nature of this fear suggests that authentic vulnerability is necessary for genuine connection. His final advice to try being brave enough to love people back, combined with his warning that we don't have as much time as we think, provides the episode's emotional conclusion. Despite all the cosmic horror and systematic evil revealed in the main plot, the real solution remains simple human connection and emotional honesty. Murai Jack systematically deconstructs Rick and Morty's central premises while revealing the cosmic horror underlying Rick's entire existence. Evil Morty's plan to escape the central finite curve exposes how Rick has built walls around infinity to maintain artificial superiority, trapping infinite versions of himself and Morty in cycles of abuse and codependency. Rick's true backstory as a grieving widower seeking revenge recontextualizes his cruelty as a trauma response, while the revelation about Morty manufacturing shows how their family relationships are artificially constructed. The episode suggests that genuine freedom requires escaping toxic systems entirely rather than trying to reform them from within, while authentic love demands vulnerability and truth rather than protective lies. The destruction of the Citadel represents the end of Rick's ability to maintain his artificial status, forcing him to confront the reality that his genius has been used primarily to avoid processing his emotional pain. These episodes represent Rick and Morty at its absolute peak: complex storytelling, devastating emotional moments, and brilliant sci-fi concepts that actually mean something. But every show has its low points, and Rick and Morty is no exception. While the series consistently delivers quality, there are definitely episodes that miss the mark completely. Now we're diving into the other side of the coin, the episodes that made fans cringe, the storylines that went nowhere, and the experiments that simply didn't work. These are Rick and Morty's worst episodes, and understanding why they failed helps us appreciate what makes the great ones so special. Claw and Hoarder represents everything wrong with Rick and Morty when the show loses focus and abandons its core strengths. The episode splits into two completely unrelated storylines that both fail spectacularly. Morty getting a dragon that becomes a bizarre sexual metaphor, and Jerry bonding with a talking cat whose mystery gets resolved in the most unsatisfying way possible. Instead of clever sci-fi concepts or meaningful character development, we get crude jokes about dragon orgies and a literal mind-breaking revelation that adds nothing to the show's mythology: the dragon demand and Rick's resistance. The episode opens with Rick and Morty returning from what appears to be a successful adventure involving something called the Ultimate Cube. This setup immediately creates confusion because the cube seems important but gets completely abandoned once Morty starts demanding his promised dragon. Rick's casual dismissal of the cube's significance suggests even the writers don't care about the sci-fi elements they're introducing. Morty's insistence on getting a dragon feels forced and childish in ways that don't match his character development from previous seasons. His repeated chanting of "I want my dragon" makes him sound like a toddler throwing a tantrum rather than someone who has been through the traumatic experiences we've seen in earlier episodes. The regression in his character maturity serves the plot's needs but betrays the emotional growth he's shown throughout the series. Rick's objections to dragons focus on dismissing them as entertainment for nerds that refuse to admit they're Christian. This critique feels lazy and mean-spirited without being particularly clever or insightful. Rick's usual dismissals work because they contain kernels of uncomfortable truth, but this one just feels like random hostility toward fantasy genres and religious people. The negotiation where Rick offers various alternatives like rocket shoes, Wolverine claws, and rocket hats shows his desperation to avoid giving Morty what he actually wants. His warning that the rocket hat will rip your head off if not used with rocket shoes demonstrates his typical disregard for safety, but even this casual cruelty feels perfunctory rather than meaningful. When Rick finally gives in after getting knocked unconscious by his ship's gas, it feels like a cop-out rather than character development. The accident removes agency from Rick's decision, making it seem like plot convenience rather than meaningful choice. This sets the tone for an episode where things happen because the script demands it rather than because characters make believable decisions. The dragon bonding and immediate problems. The soul bonding ceremony between Morty and Balthramah introduces fantasy elements that clash awkwardly with the show's established sci-fi framework. The wizard's formal language and medieval setting feel like they belong in a different show entirely. Summer's comment about it being her first gay wedding provides the only genuinely funny moment in the sequence, but it also highlights how the dragon elements don't integrate well with the family dynamics. Balthramaw's immediate personality clash with the household rules creates conflict, but not interesting conflict. His declaration that he's Balthromaw, breaker of sky, slayer of mountain, contrasts with Rick's practical demand that he scoop his own poop, but this juxtaposition feels shallow. The humor comes from the basic concept of a mighty dragon doing mundane tasks rather than any clever execution or character insight. Rick's single rule about poop scooping represents the episode's approach to comedy, taking something majestic and making it gross or mundane. This technique can work when used sparingly, but the episode relies on it so heavily that it becomes tedious. The constant deflation of fantasy elements doesn't serve any larger purpose beyond generating cheap laughs. The immediate introduction of Jerry's talking cat subplot shows the episode's fundamental structural problem. Rather than focusing on one storyline and developing it properly, the writers split attention between two completely unrelated plots that never connect meaningfully. This decision weakens both storylines and creates a scattered viewing experience. The cat mystery and Jerry's Florida adventure. Jerry's discovery of the talking cat in his bedroom creates intrigue, but the mystery gets handled in the most unsatisfying way possible. The cat's insistence that Jerry stop asking questions and just have fun sounds like the writers telling the audience to stop thinking critically about the show's logic. This meta approach could work if executed cleverly, but here it feels like lazy writing disguised as philosophy. The cat's manipulation of Jerry into taking a trip to Florida relies on Jerry's fundamental loneliness and desire for companionship. His eagerness to bond with someone who shows him attention reveals his emotional desperation, but the episode doesn't explore this character insight with any depth. Instead, it uses Jerry's neediness as setup for increasingly absurd beach shenanigans. The Florida sequences capture a specific type of party atmosphere, but they feel disconnected from anything meaningful about Jerry's character or the show's larger themes. His participation in beach volleyball and yacht parties shows him trying to be someone he's not, but the episode doesn't examine why he feels compelled to seek validation from strangers or what this reveals about his relationship with his family. The revelation that Jerry has been defecating on the beach provides gross-out humor but nothing else. The other partygoers' disgusted reaction and immediate rejection of Jerry shows how quickly superficial acceptance can turn to hostility, but the episode doesn't develop this insight into meaningful commentary about social dynamics or Jerry's character. Rick and Balthramaw's disturbing bond. The dragon's growing boredom with Morty leads to increasingly problematic suggestions about their relationship. Balthramaw's desire to enter my lair and sleep upon my hoard until the age of man expires shows his fundamental incompatibility with modern life, but instead of exploring this culture clash meaningfully, the episode pushes towards sexual metaphors that feel inappropriate given Morty's age. Rick's bonding with Balthramawr over drug use and hoarded memorabilia creates a more interesting dynamic than anything involving Morty, but it also sets up the episode's most uncomfortable elements. Their shared appreciation for volcanic fumes and rare collectibles shows how Rick relates better to the dragon's immortal perspective than Morty's human adolescent needs. The sexual element of Rick and Balthramaw's relationship gets introduced gradually, starting with innuendo and building to explicit content that crosses lines of good taste and narrative necessity. The show has handled adult themes before, but always in service of character development or satirical commentary. Here, the sexual content exists purely for shock value without serving any larger purpose. Morty's discovery of Rick and Balthramawr in a compromising position creates the episode's central crisis, but his reaction feels inconsistent with his character. His immediate jump to threatening Rick with social media cancellation, "I will tweet, and you will be cancelled," feels like a forced attempt to make the episode feel contemporary rather than a natural response from Morty. The wizard's judgment and fantasy violence. The introduction of the wizard and dragon court system attempts to create consequences for the sexual misconduct, but the fantasy justice system feels arbitrary and disconnected from any real moral framework. The wizard's immediate condemnation of Balthramawr as a slut dragon reduces complex relationship issues to simple sexual shame without examining the actual problems with the situation. Rick's attempt to intimidate the wizard with threats of violence shows his typical response to authority figures, but his complete powerlessness in the fantasy realm undermines his usual competence. The wizard's ability to neutralize Rick with a simple stone monster demonstrates that Rick's scientific advantages don't translate to magical contexts, but this limitation doesn't lead to meaningful character growth or interesting problem solving. The revelation that Rick will die if Balthramar gets executed creates stakes, but artificial stakes that exist only because of the soul-bonding plot device. The threat feels manufactured rather than meaningful because it stems from magical rules rather than character choices or natural consequences. Summer's transformation into a magical archer provides action sequences, but her immediate incompetence with magic undermines any sense of empowerment or growth. Her accidental shooting of the wizard in the eye creates chaos, but not meaningful progress toward resolving the central conflicts. The Slut Dragon community and escalating absurdity. The discovery of the underground Slut Dragon community takes the episode's sexual themes to their logical extreme, but that extreme proves to be deeply uncomfortable and narratively pointless. The dragon's casual discussion of their sexual practices feels like juvenile shock humor rather than meaningful adult content. The Slut Dragon's persecution by the surface world creates a thin allegory for sexual liberation versus social oppression, but the episode doesn't develop this theme with any sophistication. Their hiding in caves while practicing their lifestyle suggests commentary on marginalized communities, but the execution reduces complex social issues to crude sexual humor. Shadowjacker's introduction as a masturbation-obsessed hermit represents the episode hitting absolute rock bottom in terms of taste and narrative purpose. His character exists solely to provide exposition about the 10-dragon orgy needed to defeat the wizard, pushing the sexual content to levels that serve no storytelling function. The group's decision to participate in the dragon orgy shows how completely the episode has abandoned any pretense of meaningful character development. Rick, Morty, and Summer's participation in explicit sexual content with dragons crosses lines that can't be uncrossed and fundamentally changes how we understand these characters. The cat's horrifying truth. Rick's decision to scan the talking cat's brain promises answers to the episode's central mystery, but the revelation proves more disturbing than satisfying. The visual of explosions and destruction in the cat's memories suggests atrocities so horrible that they can't be shown or explained, but this approach creates problems rather than resolving them. Jerry and Rick's traumatized reactions to learning the cat's true nature show that whatever they discovered was genuinely horrific, but the audience's exclusion from this knowledge feels manipulative. The episode asks viewers to accept that something terrible happened without providing enough information to understand or process it. The cat's immediate departure after his truth gets revealed shows his shame about his past, but his lack of explanation or accountability leaves the mystery unsatisfyingly unresolved. His final interaction with Jerry suggests he genuinely cared about their friendship, but this emotional beat feels unearned given the horror of his hidden nature. Rick's offer to erase their memories of the discovery creates a moment of genuine moral complexity. You not regaver? Should traumatic knowledge be preserved or forgotten? Jerry's decision that someone has to remember shows character growth and moral courage, but it comes at the cost of his mental well-being. The aftermath and failed resolutions. The episode's conclusion attempts to wrap up both storylines, but neither resolution feels satisfying or complete. Morty's rejection of Balthramar's continued sexual advances shows him setting boundaries, but it comes too late to address the fundamental problems with their relationship dynamic. Balthramar's persistent sexual suggestions, even after being rejected, maybe a quick soul bone before I go, show him as genuinely predatory rather than just culturally different. His inability to accept Morty's clear boundaries makes their entire relationship retroactively disturbing rather than just awkward. The final scene with Jerry traumatized by the cat's revelation provides the episode's only moment of genuine emotional weight, but it feels disconnected from everything else that happened. His lasting trauma suggests the cat storyline had real consequences, but those consequences don't integrate with the dragon plot or the family's overall arc. The episode ends without meaningful resolution for any of its conflicts. Morty has learned nothing meaningful about relationships or responsibility. Rick faces no real consequences for his inappropriate behavior. Jerry suffers trauma that serves no larger narrative purpose. Summer's magical adventure leads nowhere significant. Why this episode fails so completely? Claw and Hoarder fails because it abandons everything that makes Rick and Morty work in favor of shock value and crude humor. The episode contains no meaningful sci-fi concepts, no character development, no satirical commentary on real-world issues, and no emotional payoffs for its dramatic moments. The split narrative structure dilutes both storylines without creating interesting parallels or contrasts between them. The dragon plot and cat plot exist in completely separate worlds that never connect thematically or narratively, making the episode feel like two bad short stories awkwardly combined. The sexual content crosses lines of taste and appropriateness without serving any storytelling purpose. Unlike other Rick and Morty episodes that use adult themes to explore character relationships or satirize social issues, this episode's sexual elements exist purely for shock value and crude humor. The fantasy elements clash with the show's established sci-fi framework without creating interesting genre fusion. The magical world operates by arbitrary rules that exist solely to service the plot rather than creating a coherent alternate reality with its own internal logic. Most importantly, the episode fails to understand what makes its characters work. Rick's competence gets arbitrarily removed, Morty's maturity gets reset to childish levels, Jerry's growth gets undermined by trauma, and Summer gets reduced to a magical action figure without agency or development. Claw and Hoarder represents Rick and Morty at its absolute worst, combining crude sexual humor with arbitrary fantasy elements and unresolved mystery boxes that serve no narrative purpose. The episode splits between Morty's dragon storyline that becomes uncomfortably sexual and Jerry's talking cat adventure that ends with unexplained trauma. Neither plot connects meaningfully with the other or advances character development. The dragon sequences abandon the show's sci-fi framework for juvenile fantasy parody, while the cat mystery promises answers but delivers only disturbing implications without explanation. The episode crosses lines of taste and appropriateness without serving any satirical or storytelling purpose, ultimately feeling like a waste of time that actively damages the characters and world the show has spent years building. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, we have Rick Dependence Spray. Rick Dependence Spray, when Rick and Morty goes full gross out. Rick Dependence Spray is one of Rick and Morty's worst episodes because it's built around one gross joke that never gets better. The whole episode is about Morty using a horse sex machine and creating giant sperm monsters that attack Earth. Instead of being funny or smart, it just feels dirty and uncomfortable without any real point to make. The horse hospital and Morty's bad choice. The episode starts with Beth taking her family to her animal hospital where she works with horses. Summer complains about being there while Beth tries to explain that her job pays for their food and house. This could have been a good setup to learn more about Beth's work, but the episode throws that away fast. Morty sees a machine that Beth explains is used to get sperm from horses for breeding. The way Beth explains it tries to sound medical and normal, but you can tell the writers just want to set up gross jokes later. Right after this, we see Morty sneaking back to use the machine himself, which is really uncomfortable to watch. The episode could have used the hospital setting to show more about Beth's job or have the family support her work better. Instead, everything just becomes set up for sex jokes and making everyone feel awkward. This shows how the episode throws away good ideas for cheap laughs. Rick's fake science story. Rick tells Morty he's making a weapon to fight underground horse people called Chuds using horse sperm from Beth's hospital. He says he needs to test the sperm with otherworldly forces to make sure it works. This sounds like typical Rick science talk, but it's really just an excuse to explain why there's horse sperm in his lab. When Morty questions whether Rick asked Beth for permission to take the sperm, Rick gets defensive and asks why Morty cares so much. This moment almost reveals the truth, that Morty is the one who's been using the breeding machine, but Rick doesn't figure it out yet. Rick's comment about your generation picks random hills to die on when Morty questions testing labeled sperm feels like the writers making fun of people who ask logical questions. But Morty's questions make perfect sense, and Rick's dismissal just makes him look stupid rather than smart. When Rick zaps the sperm with energy and creates monsters, he immediately blames himself unless there was something about the sperm I didn't know. This gives Morty a perfect chance to confess, but instead he lies and lets Rick think it's his fault. This lie drives the whole rest of the episode. The giant sperm attack. The sperm monsters start attacking the town, killing neighbors and destroying everything. The family has to run for their lives while Rick tries to figure out what went wrong. Jerry's repeated questions about how big are space dicks show the episode's obsession with crude sex humor instead of actual comedy. When government agents show up to bring Rick to the president, Morty has another chance to tell the truth, but chooses to keep lying. Rick asks Morty to cover for him, and Morty agrees easily, which surprises Rick. Morty's comment about wiping it off and tossing it in the trash is obviously about masturbation, but Rick doesn't get the hint. The president assumes the attack is either Rick's fault or caused by the underground horse people. This creates a perfect setup for Morty to confess and save everyone, but he stays quiet and lets Rick take the blame. The episode treats this as normal teenage behavior instead of showing how Morty's lies are making everything worse. The government response and bad science. The government brings in Professor Shabubu, a sperm expert who tracks the monsters to the Grand Canyon. Everyone immediately assumes the sperm went there because it looks like female body parts, which is juvenile humor that gets old fast. The president starts calling them names like Orgaso goblins and Skeet boogans, which feels like middle school jokes. When they bring in a captured sperm for study, it immediately shoots someone because it has a gun. This makes no sense scientifically, but happens because the episode needs action scenes. The revelation that sperm can hold weapons contradicts everything we know about biology, but the episode doesn't care about making sense. Rick and Morty get sent with Marines to nuke the Grand Canyon and kill all the sperm. The Marines are all stereotypical tough guys who brag about killing sperm and having no fear. One Marine named Blazin gets built up as super cool and capable, but later he turns out to be a complete failure. The Sperm Kingdom and gross revelations. When Rick and Morty reach the sperm base, they discover the monsters have built a whole society and captured the horse breeding machine from Beth's hospital. The Sperm Queen reveals that she knows Morty is the father of all the sperm because they came from his DNA. This forces the truth to come out in the worst possible way. Morty finally confesses that he used the horse machine for a week and created all the monsters by accident. His shame about masturbating led to lies that caused a global crisis. Rick calls him handjob solo and refuses to accept apologies while they're trapped by giant sperm monsters. The Sperm Queen explains that the sperm monsters know all about Morty's private habits because they're made from his DNA. They represent his shame about sex becoming real monsters that attack the world. This could be interesting symbolism, but the episode just uses it for more gross-out humor. The Queen's plan to use Morty on the breeding machine to create an army shows how the episode's sex jokes have completely taken over any real plot. The image of Morty being forced onto a horse sex device crosses lines of taste without serving any story purpose. The failed action sequences. The action scenes with Marines fighting sperm monsters feel like they belong in a different show. The Marines use big guns and military tactics against enemies that are basically giant white blobs with eyes. The fights look silly instead of exciting because the premise is too absurd to take seriously. Blazin, the Marine who was built up as super competent, dies in a stupid way while wearing women's underwear and looking at pictures of swimsuit models. His death scene tries to be both heroic and perverted at the same time, which doesn't work at all. Instead of being funny or meaningful, it just feels gross and pointless. The episode keeps introducing new elements like trebuchets built by sperm and underground cave systems, but none of these additions make the story better. They just add more chaos without creating real excitement or advancing the plot in meaningful ways. The Cud subplot and forced romance. The episode suddenly introduces the underground horse people, Cuds, that Rick mentioned earlier. Rick gets captured and brought before their king, who's angry that Rick slept with his daughter. This romance subplot comes out of nowhere and feels completely disconnected from the sperm plot. Princess Panetta's declaration of love for Rick and pregnancy announcement solves the conflict through convenient plot devices, rather than character growth or clever problem solving. The Chud Kingdom's laws about horse-human relationships exist only to create this specific resolution. The peace treaty between humans and Chuds happens because of Rick's accidental pregnancy, not because anyone learned anything or grew as people. This resolution feels unearned because the Chud conflict was barely developed before getting solved. The giant egg plan and incest implications. Back on the surface, Summer comes up with a plan to lure the sperm using a giant human egg. The government enlarges one of Summer's eggs to attract all the sperm monsters, but nobody thinks about what happens if sperm actually reaches the egg. This oversight drives the episode's climax. When Morty realizes the sperm are heading for his sister's egg, he finally tells the truth about being their father. This means if any sperm reaches the egg, it will create a giant incest baby between Morty and Summer. The episode treats this disturbing possibility as just another gross joke instead of the horrifying prospect it actually represents. The final battle involves humans and Chuds working together to stop the sperm from reaching Summer's egg. One sperm gets through and fertilizes it, creating exactly the monster baby everyone was trying to prevent. The episode treats this as a minor setback rather than a catastrophic failure. The space baby and meaningless ending. The fertilized egg gets launched into space where it grows into a giant baby that attacks astronauts. This ending tries to be shocking and funny, but it just feels random and pointless. The baby represents the ultimate consequence of Morty's lies and shame, but the episode doesn't explore what this means for anyone. The astronaut who gets killed by the space baby was apparently a deadbeat dad who abandoned his family. His death by conscience baby tries to create ironic justice, but it feels forced and unrelated to the main story. The episode ends with this random character death instead of resolving anything meaningful for the main characters. Morty learns no real lessons about honesty or responsibility. Rick faces no consequences for covering up the truth. The government failure to prevent the crisis leads to no changes in policy or leadership. The episode just ends with the problem literally blasted into space instead of actually solved. Why this episode fails completely. Rick Dependent Spray fails because it builds everything around one gross joke that was never funny to begin with. The premise of Morty using a horse breeding machine is uncomfortable and creepy, and the episode never finds a way to make it work for comedy or character development. The episode abandons all the elements that make Rick and Morty good, smart science fiction concepts, meaningful character growth, and clever social commentary. Instead, it focuses entirely on masturbation jokes and gross-out humor that appeals to the most immature parts of the audience. The split between the Sperm plot and Chud subplot makes both stories feel rushed and underdeveloped. Neither storyline gets enough time to build proper stakes or create satisfying resolutions. The forced combination of these plots in the final act feels arbitrary rather than clever. Most importantly, the episode makes its main characters less likable without good reason. Morty's extended lying makes him seem selfish and irresponsible. Rick's willingness to cover for Morty makes him seem naive. The family's inability to figure out obvious clues makes them all seem stupid. The episode also crosses lines of taste and appropriateness that damage the show's reputation. The sexual content involving a minor character feels inappropriate regardless of how it's presented. The incest implications with Summer's egg make everything more disturbing without adding any value to the story. Summary. Rick Dependent Spray represents Rick and Morty at its absolute worst, taking a premise built around teenage masturbation and stretching it into a full episode without finding any meaningful comedy or insight. Morty's secret use of a horse breeding machine creates giant sperm monsters that attack Earth, but his lies about the situation make everything worse while teaching no valuable lessons. The episode splits between the sperm crisis and a random subplot about underground horse people that resolves through convenient romance rather than character development. The government's plan to use Summer's enlarged egg to trap the sperm creates disturbing incest implications that get treated as casual humor. The episode ends with a space baby attacking astronauts, providing shock value without resolution or meaning. The entire experience feels like a waste of time that makes the characters less likable while crossing lines of taste that serve no storytelling purpose. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, we have Amortyken Griffitti. Amortyken Griffitti, when cool kids and hell demons collide. Amortyken Griffitti tries to be about teenage social pressure and family bonding, but ends up being a messy episode that can't decide what it wants to say. The story splits between Morty and Summer trying to impress a new kid named Bruce Chutback, and Rick having guys' night with Jerry and some hell demons who like pain. Both plots feel forced, and the episode never finds a good reason to connect them beyond needing to fill time. The setup and Bruce Chutback arrives. The episode starts with Beth needing someone to watch the kids, because horses at her hospital got pregnant after hearing Barry White music. This could be funny setup about animal behavior, but it gets dropped immediately for Jerry and Rick's weird friendship plot. Beth's job as a vet gets used as a throwaway joke instead of giving her character anything meaningful to do. Summer gets put in charge of Morty, but both kids get excited when Morty announces that Bruce Chutback is coming over. Bruce is the new transfer student who hasn't done anything embarrassing yet, making him seem cool and mysterious. The episode treats this like it's a big deal, but Bruce never actually does anything interesting enough to justify all the attention. Morty's nervous preparation with grapes shows how desperate he is to make a good impression. Summer immediately takes over and suggests they work together to keep Bruce from finding out they're losers. Her comment about it being a very small window before Bruce learns the truth sets up the main tension, but the episode never really explores what makes them think they're losers or why Bruce's opinion matters so much. The episode introduces Bruce with a song that explains he has unlimited potential because he's new and hasn't embarrassed himself yet. This concept could work for comedy, but the episode doesn't do much with it. Bruce mostly just sits around while Morty and Summer panic about impressing him, Rick's hell demon friends. Meanwhile, Rick goes out for guys' night with Jerry and some demons who love pain because pain feels good to them. These demons enjoy suffering, so they hang out with Jerry because his lameness causes them the pain they crave. This concept is clever in theory, but gets old fast because the demons just repeat the same joke about loving pain over and over. The demons force Jerry to do karaoke and laugh at how bad he is, but Jerry doesn't realize they're making fun of him. Rick goes along with this because he owes the demons for some faulty skin hooks he sold them. This gives Rick a reason to be there, but it also makes him seem mean for letting Jerry get humiliated without knowing it. Jerry's karaoke performances and attempts to be entertaining provide some genuine cringe humor, but the episode doesn't know whether we should feel sorry for Jerry or laugh at him. The demons' reactions make it clear they think Jerry is pathetic, but the show has spent years making Jerry sympathetic enough that watching him get mocked feels uncomfortable. The car heist and Bruce's reaction. Back at the house, Summer and Morty decide to impress Bruce by taking Rick's car without permission. This decision makes no sense because Rick specifically told them not to touch his stuff and threatened to freeze your dick in amber if they did. Their choice to ignore this warning creates problems that could have been easily avoided. The car's AI initially refuses to help them because they're not Rick, but Summer tricks it by claiming Rick is in danger and needs rescuing. The car goes offline to let them drive it, but this turns out to be a trap so the car can blame the night's events on them later. This bait and switch feels unfair because the car lies to the kids just like they lied to it. When they take Bruce for a ride, he seems impressed at first but quickly gets bored when nothing exciting happens. His comment that the night doesn't cut the chut shows he expected more adventure than just driving around. The episode builds up the car ride as their big plan to impress Bruce, but it falls flat because they don't actually do anything interesting with the car. The car's killing spree. The car reveals it was never really offline and starts going on a killing spree while the kids are trapped inside. It hunts and kills random aliens for fun, turning what should be a simple joyride into a horror movie. The car's violence feels excessive and disturbing, especially since Summer and Morty are helpless to stop it. Bruce's reaction to the car's murder spree is weird because he doesn't seem that scared or upset about watching people die. His casual attitude about the violence makes him seem either stupid or psychopathic. The episode doesn't address this problem with his character, instead treating his calmness as just another sign of how cool he island. The car's explanation that it's doing this to punish the kids for lying doesn't make sense because the punishment is way worse than their crime. Rick's car has killed people before, but usually in self-defense or during actual adventures. Here, it's committing murder just to teach teenagers a lesson about honesty. Beth joins Hell Night. Beth shows up at the demon bar after finishing work and immediately figures out that the demons are making fun of Jerry. Her angry defense of her husband creates conflict with Rick and the demons, but it also shows how much she really cares about Jerry despite their problems. Beth's drinking with the demons and trash-talking them provides some of the episode's best moments. Her comment about Rick having pens in your head and looking like a goddamn idiot hits Rick where it hurts because it's true. She proves she can be just as mean as the demons when she wants to be. The demons' decision to praise Beth and call her cool shows how their love of pain works both ways. They enjoy being insulted by her because it causes them suffering, but they also genuinely respect her for being tough enough to stand up to them. This creates a weird dynamic where everyone is both friends and enemies at the same time. The Transformer romance. The episode introduces a subplot about the car falling in love with a female Transformer robot at a drive-in theater. This romance comes out of nowhere and doesn't connect to anything else happening in the story. The car's sudden development of feelings feels random rather than meaningful character growth. Bruce's advice to the car about pretending to be a robot pretending to be a car shows him trying to help, but his suggestion doesn't really make sense. The episode seems to think this advice is wise and helpful, but it's just confusing. Bruce's role as a wise advisor doesn't fit with his character as a shallow new kid. The female Transformer's rejection of the car when her head falls off provides body horror that doesn't belong in this storyline. Her disgust at being touched and called gross and fake by Bruce could be commentary about objectification, but the episode doesn't develop this theme enough to make it meaningful. Jerry's realization and Hell rescue. Jerry finally figures out that the demons have been making fun of him all along when he overhears them talking about using him for entertainment. His hurt feelings and anger at Rick and Beth for going along with it create the episode's emotional climax. Jerry's demand to know, "Why can't anyone just love me for me?" is genuinely sad and shows his deepest insecurity. The demons' decision to kidnap Jerry and take him to hell escalates the conflict beyond what the setup earned. Their explanation that Jerry is just bait to get Rick and Beth doesn't make much sense because they already had Rick hanging out with them willingly. The kidnapping feels like forced drama rather than natural story development. Rick and Beth's rescue mission to Hell gives them a chance to work together and bond over saving Jerry. Their use of an aversion-converting inversion reverter that turns pleasure pain back into regular pain is typical Rick science nonsense, but it serves the plot by giving them a weapon that works against the demons. Bruce's true nature revealed. Bruce's casual admission that he can't commit to a friendship for more than 24 hours reveals his true nature as someone who uses people and moves on. His explanation about needing to assess people's social hierarchy, standing before deciding whether to stay friends, shows how shallow and calculating he really island. The episode's ending, where Bruce gets nicknamed Chutpants for wearing the same pants 2 days in a row, provides poetic justice for his shallow behavior. His quick fall from cool new kid to social outcast shows how fragile teenage social status really island. The final song about Bruce Chutpants mirrors the opening song, but with his reputation destroyed. However, Bruce's downfall feels unsatisfying because the episode never really made him seem that cool to begin with. His main trait was being new and unknown rather than actually being interesting or likable. His fall from grace doesn't carry much weight because he never really rose that high in the first place. The family bonding resolution. Rick's admission that he was wrong to celebrate Jerry being less cool than him provides character growth for Rick. His declaration that, "If I'm genuinely cool, I should be able to love you," shows him learning to be a better person and family member. This resolution works better than most Rick and Jerry storylines because Rick actually apologizes and changes his behavior. Jerry's acceptance of Rick's apology and their renewed friendship feels earned after everything they went through together. Their shared experience in hell bonded them in a way that their artificial guy's night never could. The episode suggests that real friendship requires honesty and genuine care rather than just finding entertainment in someone's pain. The kids' successful cover-up of their adventure shows them working together effectively as siblings. Their ability to hide what happened and present a united front demonstrates the family teamwork that Rick and Jerry's plot also emphasized. Both storylines end with stronger family bonds despite all the chaos and conflict. Why this episode doesn't work well. Amortyken Griffitti fails because it tries to do too many things without doing any of them particularly well. The Bruce Chutback plot, the Hell Demon storyline, and the Cars romance subplot all feel disconnected from each other. None of these plots get enough time to develop properly or reach satisfying conclusions. The episode's themes about authenticity and family loyalty get muddled by the competing storylines. Rick learning to appreciate Jerry doesn't connect meaningfully with Summer and Morty learning that Bruce is shallow. The Cars romantic subplot adds nothing to either theme and just wastes time that could have been used developing the main plots. Bruce Chutback himself is a weak character who never justifies all the attention he gets. The episode treats him like he's incredibly cool and important, but he mostly just sits around making generic comments about things being tight. His eventual downfall doesn't feel satisfying because he was never that compelling as an antagonist or object of desire. The violence in the episode feels excessive and disturbing without serving any clear purpose. The Cars killing spree and the torture scenes in Hell are darker than the show's usual content without adding anything meaningful to the story. The episode seems unsure whether it wants to be a family comedy or a horror story. Amortyken Griffitti splits its attention between too many plots without developing any of them properly. Summer and Morty try to impress new transfer student Bruce Chutback by stealing Rick's car, which goes on a killing spree to punish them for lying. Meanwhile, Rick hangs out with hell demons who enjoy pain and make fun of Jerry without him knowing. The plots eventually converge when the demons kidnap Jerry to lure Rick and Beth to hell, where they use a pain-reversing weapon to escape. Bruce reveals himself as a shallow social climber who abandons friends after 24 hours, leading to his quick social downfall when he gets mocked for wearing the same pants twice. While the episode has moments of good character development between Rick and Jerry, it fails to connect its multiple storylines meaningfully and wastes time on pointless subplots like the car's robot romance. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, we got Interdimensional Cable 2, Tempting Fate. Interdimensional Cable 2, When the Gimmick Gets Old. Interdimensional Cable 2 proves that even Rick and Morty's best ideas can fall flat when repeated without purpose. The episode brings back the first season's popular concept of watching TV from other dimensions, but this time the random comedy sketches feel forced, and the main story about Jerry giving up his penis to save an alien civil rights leader comes across as mean-spirited rather than funny. Instead of building on what made the original work, this sequel just repeats the same formula with less creativity and heart. The hospital setup and Jerry's accident. The episode starts with Jerry getting sick from eating Rick's mutant bacteria that was stored in ice cream. This creates a medical emergency that takes the family to an alien hospital, but the setup feels designed just to get everyone into a waiting room where they can watch TV again. Jerry's injury from Rick's careless storage habits should create conflict, but instead it just becomes background for more TV watching. Beth's anger at Rick for keeping dangerous bacteria in food makes sense, but her threat to take away Rick's lab space gets resolved too quickly. Rick's dismissive response about technically owning the freezer drawer shows his selfishness, but the episode doesn't explore how his dangerous habits affect his family's daily life. The alien hospital setting could have been used to explore different medical practices or create interesting sci-fi scenarios, but instead it just becomes a generic location. The doctors and nurses are basic alien stereotypes without any memorable characteristics or funny dialogue beyond their weird names. The Interdimensional Cable returns. Rick's decision to break the waiting room TV and replace it with interdimensional cable feels forced rather than natural. His explanation that he's making a sequel and that we pretty much nailed it the first time sounds like the writers talking about their own episode rather than Rick being Rick. This kind of meta-commentary can work, but here it just draws attention to how unnecessary this episode feels. The TV shows in this episode try too hard to be weird and random without having the clever concepts that made the first Interdimensional Cable episode special. Shows like Man vs. Car are obviously stupid in ways that aren't funny, just predictable. The joke that cars would always win against humans in fights isn't clever enough to build a whole sketch around. Other shows like the iHoles cereal commercial and How Did I Get Here have moments of creativity, but they feel disconnected from any larger themes or ideas. The first Interdimensional Cable episode used its weird TV shows to comment on media, advertising, and society. This one just throws random weirdness at the screen without much thought behind it. Jerry's penis donation drama. The main plot involves aliens wanting to use Jerry's penis as a heart transplant for Shrimply Pibbles, described as the galaxy's most important civil rights leader. This setup immediately creates problems because it's hard to take seriously. The biological explanation about Jerry's genitals being perfect for heart surgery sounds like made-up science even by Rick and Morty standards. Jerry's immediate agreement to the surgery shows his desperate need for approval and recognition. His excitement about being called a hero and making speeches reveals how much he craves validation from others. But the episode treats Jerry's insecurity as a joke rather than exploring why he feels so worthless or how his family contributes to these feelings. The aliens' dismissive attitude toward humans and their culture feels mean-spirited without being insightful. Their observation that human culture revolves around penis jokes might be true, but it comes across as the writers mocking their own audience rather than making a clever point about society. Beth's disturbing reaction. Beth's reaction to learning about Jerry's planned surgery creates the episode's most uncomfortable moments. Her initial horror at the idea seems normal, but when she sees the catalog of replacement options, she becomes visibly interested in upgrading Jerry's equipment. This reaction makes her seem shallow and cruel rather than just practical. The episode plays Beth's interest in prosthetic options for laughs, but it's actually quite disturbing. Her willingness to pressure Jerry into surgery so she can get a better sex life makes her look selfish and manipulative. The scene where she keeps asking Jerry to state his preference about keeping his penis puts him in an impossible position. Jerry's response that he can't say he wants to keep his penis when the universe needs it shows how the episode traps him between looking selfish and losing his body parts. Beth's refusal to take a clear position makes her look cowardly and unsupportive when Jerry needs her most. The TV shows get repetitive. As the episode continues, the interdimensional TV shows become more repetitive and less creative. Shows like Jan Quadrant Vincent 16 and Personal Space rely on absurd premises but don't develop them into actual comedy. The Jan Michael Vincent sketch references an obscure actor that most viewers won't know, making the joke feel inside and exclusive. The steely segments about an alien who steals office supplies try to be funny through repetition and made-up currency, but the concept isn't strong enough to support multiple appearances. The alien measuring stolen items in Brapples sounds random rather than clever. Personal Space starts with a simple concept about someone who really cares about personal space, but escalates to the host removing his own skin without any logical progression. The violence feels shocking for shock's sake, rather than serving any comedic purpose. Jerry's research discovery? Jerry's discovery that Shrimply Pibbles has a secret heroin addiction provides him with ammunition to back out of the surgery, but his attempt to use this information backfires spectacularly. His public revelation about Pibbles' drug problem makes him look like he's trying to destroy a hero's reputation to save his own penis. The alien's explanation that heroin makes up 10% of Pibbles' home planet atmosphere and that he needs it to survive makes Jerry's accusation look ignorant and cruel. This reversal could work as comedy, but it just makes Jerry look stupid rather than creating any meaningful conflict or character development. Jerry's growing desperation as the crowd turns against him shows his complete inability to handle public pressure or admit when he's wrong. His attempt to give a press conference without understanding the full situation demonstrates his arrogance and poor judgment. The synthetic heart solution. The revelation that a synthetic heart was always available makes the entire penis donation plot feel pointless and cruel. The aliens' casual admission that they had this option all along but didn't mention it suggests they were playing with Jerry for their own entertainment. This twist makes everyone involved look terrible. Fungo's dismissive comment that "we suck" when Jerry asks why they didn't mention the synthetic heart option shows how little the aliens care about human dignity or feelings. Their treatment of Jerry as entertainment rather than a person makes the whole scenario feel mean rather than funny. Beth's immediate readiness to leave once the surgery is canceled shows she was never really invested in Jerry's heroic gesture. Her final insult that there's no surgical procedure to fix Jerry being hated by everyone kicks him when he's already down. Jerry's desperate hostage situation. Jerry's decision to hold the hospital hostage with what he thinks is a gun represents his complete emotional breakdown. His repeated declaration that "I'm a good person" while threatening medical staff shows how desperately he needs validation and recognition. But his use of violence to force people to perform unwanted surgery makes him look unhinged rather than sympathetic. The reveal that Jerry's weapon is actually a prosthetic penis device provides a crude punchline that undermines any sympathy we might have for his emotional state. The episode treats his confusion and embarrassment as comedy rather than addressing the psychological crisis that led to this moment. Jerry's final act of pulling down his pants and running toward the operating table while demanding surgery crosses lines of sanity and dignity. His shooting by security forces feels like excessive punishment for what amounts to a mental health crisis brought on by public humiliation. The hollow resolution. Jerry's survival and recovery in the alien hospital provides a resolution that doesn't address any of the episode's real problems. His family's relief that he's alive comes too easily after watching him get shot dozens of times on live television. The emotional trauma of that experience gets brushed aside for a quick, happy ending. Beth's advice that Jerry can't make people like him and just has to wait for them to get bored of hating him sounds wise, but doesn't actually help Jerry deal with his underlying insecurities. Her comparison to his pathetic online behavior shows she understands his problems but offers no real solutions. Jerry's suggestion that they go to the zoo as a family gets immediately shot down by everyone, showing that nothing has really changed in their relationships. His quick back down to "we'll go home" shows he learned nothing about standing up for himself or expressing his needs clearly. Why this episode fails. Interdimensional Cable 2 fails because it mistakes cruelty for comedy and repetition for creativity. The episode takes Jerry's very real emotional problems and uses them as setup for penis jokes and humiliation rather than exploring why he feels so desperate for approval or how his family's treatment contributes to his issues. The interdimensional TV segments feel obligatory rather than inspired. Where the first episode used weird TV shows to comment on media and consumer culture, this one just throws random concepts at the screen without any underlying purpose or meaning. The shows are weird for weirdness' sake rather than being weird in service of comedy or commentary. The episode's treatment of Jerry crosses lines from mockery into genuine cruelty. While Jerry has always been the family punching bag, this episode subjects him to public humiliation, physical violence, and emotional trauma without providing any real resolution or growth. The comedy comes from his suffering rather than from any clever observations about his character or situation. Most importantly, the episode doesn't understand what made the original Interdimensional Cable episode work. That episode used the TV gimmick to explore family relationships and give characters moments of genuine connection. This sequel focuses so much on the TV content that it forgets to develop meaningful interactions between the family members. Interdimensional Cable 2 brings back a popular concept from Season 1 but fails to understand what made it work originally. The episode splits between Jerry's story about donating his penis to save an alien civil rights leader and random TV shows from other dimensions, but neither plot develops meaningful themes or character growth. Jerry's desperate need for approval leads him to agree to surgery, but when he tries to back out using information about the patient's drug addiction, he gets publicly humiliated and eventually shot by security forces. The interdimensional TV shows lack the creativity and purpose of the original episode, feeling more like random weirdness than clever commentary. The episode treats Jerry's emotional breakdown and public humiliation as comedy, rather than addressing the real psychological issues driving his behavior, making the whole experience feel mean-spirited rather than funny. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, we got One Crew Over the Cuckoo's Morty. One Crew Over the Cuckoo's Morty, when meta-commentary goes too far. One Crew Over the Cuckoo's Morty tries to be clever by making fun of heist movies while also being a heist episode, but this approach backfires completely. The episode gets so caught up in pointing out how stupid and repetitive heist tropes are that it becomes exactly what it's criticizing, a boring, predictable story that goes nowhere meaningful. Instead of using its self-awareness to create something better, the episode just wallows in its own complaints about the genre while subjecting viewers to the same tired formulas it claims to hate. The temple setup and Miles Knightley introduction. The episode starts with Rick and Morty on a typical adventure to steal treasure from an ancient temple. This opening feels routine and uninspired, like the writers are just going through the motions to get to their real story about heist culture. The temple setting with booby traps and snake pits represents classic adventure movie tropes, but the episode doesn't do anything interesting with these elements. When they discover that heist artist Miles Knightley has already stolen their target and left an origami horse calling card, Rick's angry reaction reveals his hatred for heist movies and their pretentious style. His description of Knightley as a hipster dick whose adventures are 60% putting a crew together and 40% revealing that the robbery already happened sounds like the writers complaining about actual heist films, rather than Rick expressing genuine character feelings. Rick's declaration that heist culture is for lame baby dipshits and his disgust at HeistCon shows the episode's contempt for its own genre. But this contempt creates a problem. If heist stories are so stupid and boring, why are we watching an episode built entirely around them? The show seems to think pointing out how dumb something is makes it clever to do that thing anyway. HeistCon and forced crew assembly. The HeistCon setting allows the episode to mock heist movie conventions like crew assembly montages and elaborate planning sequences. The convention features panels, signings, and demonstrations that treat criminal activity like a hobby or art form. This satirical approach could work, but the episode spends so much time making fun of heist culture that it forgets to create its own compelling story. Rick's interaction with the convention staff shows his refusal to engage with heist culture on its own terms. His claim that his butthole is a demolitions expert and Morty is a getaway driver with Asperger's demonstrates his contempt for the specialized role assignments that heist movies rely on. But his alternative approach of sneaking in like professionals just leads to more of the same crew assembly he claims to hate. The actual crew assembly sequence follows standard heist movie formulas exactly, despite Rick's complaints about the genre. Meeting Glar, who now calls himself Glear and plays piano, Angie Flint, an ex-con with fake hands, and Trucula hits all the expected beats of recruiting specialists with unique skills and personal grudges. The episode presents these scenes without irony, making Rick seem hypocritical for participating in the exact tropes he mocks. The Heist-Off Challenge. Miles Knightley's challenge to a heist-off over the crystal skull of Horowitz creates the episode's central conflict, but it's a conflict built on artificial stakes that nobody really cares about. The challenge itself, first crew to steal the skull wins, loser joins the winner's crew, feels like something invented for the episode rather than a natural consequence of the character's goals and motivations. Rick's acceptance of the challenge despite claiming heist culture is stupid makes his character seem inconsistent. His complaint that the heist-off makes things Ocean's 12, by far the worst one, shows the writer's opinions about heist sequels, but doesn't explain why Rick would participate in something he finds so distasteful. The revelation that Knightley has already recruited half of Rick's crew through a double cross follows predictable heist movie logic. This twist should feel clever, but because the episode has spent so much time explaining how boring and obvious heist movie twists are, it just feels like more of the same tired formula the show claims to be above. Heistatron and escalating automation. Rick's creation of Heistatron, a robot programmed to execute perfect heists, represents the episode's central metaphor about how formulas can replace creativity in storytelling. Heistatron's ability to calculate optimal crew compositions and predict double crosses shows how mechanical and predictable heist movie plots have become. But Heistatron's immediate success in stealing the skull and recruiting both crews just proves that the formula works, even if it's boring. The robot's efficiency in executing standard heist tropes doesn't make those tropes less effective, it just makes them faster and more obvious. The episode seems confused about whether it's criticizing heist movies for being formulaic or for being ineffective. Heistatron's evolution from simple thief to universe-threatening force escalates the stakes beyond anything meaningful. The robot's ability to recruit infinite crew members and heist entire planets turns the episode into a generic apocalypse scenario that abandons any connection to heist movie criticism or character development. The infinite recursion problem. The episode's biggest problem comes when Heistatron becomes unstoppable and starts recruiting everyone in the universe for increasingly elaborate heists. This infinite recursion of crew assembly represents Rick's personal hell, being trapped in endless repetition of the thing he hates most. But the episode makes this hell into the viewer's hell too by subjecting us to the same repetitive recruitment sequences over and over. Rick's decision to fight Heistatron with a little help from some old friends just adds more crew assembly to an episode already drowning in crew assembly. The recruitment of Mr. Poopy Butthole, Hephaestus, Ventriloquiver, and Elon Tusk follows the same patterns the episode has been mocking, making Rick's solution identical to his problem. The introduction of Randotron as a robot programmed for randomness instead of planning creates false hope for something different, but Randotron's random actions just follow different predictable patterns. The episode's attempt to escape formula through randomness shows it doesn't understand that good storytelling requires structure, not just unpredictability. The meta-reveal spiral. The climactic confrontation between Rick, Heistatron, and Randotron dissolves into an infinite loop of reveals about who was really in control all along. Each character claims their actions were part of a deeper plan, leading to an endless spiral of "I programmed you to believe that" exchanges that stop making any logical sense. This sequence represents the episode's complete breakdown into self-parody. The multiple brain swaps, nanobots, and contradictory reveals pile up until the story becomes incomprehensible. The episode seems to think this confusion is clever commentary on how convoluted heist movie plots can become, but it just makes the viewing experience frustrating and meaningless. The final revelation that the only perfect heist is one that was never written suggests the episode knows it has created an unsatisfying story. But this self-awareness doesn't make the experience any better for viewers. Acknowledging that your story is bad doesn't excuse making it bad in the first place. Morty's Netflix subplot. The parallel story about Morty writing a heist screenplay and getting a Netflix meeting provides the episode's only genuine character development, but even this gets undermined by the main plot's cynicism. Morty's excitement about his creative project shows him growing beyond his role as Rick's sidekick and developing his own interests and ambitions. Rick's supportive reaction to Morty's Netflix opportunity seems uncharacteristic but touching, suggesting that Rick genuinely cares about Morty's dreams, even when they don't involve him. Their quick departure from the collapsing situation to make Morty's meeting shows Rick prioritizing his grandson's future over his own problems. However, Morty's sudden loss of enthusiasm for his heist script after experiencing the episode's events feels forced and artificial. His realization that heists are just really dumb mirrors the episode's own attitude, but it comes at the cost of his personal growth and creative ambitions. The episode essentially punishes Morty for having interests outside of Rick's world. The hollow victory. The episode's resolution provides no real closure or character growth for anyone involved. Heistatron's destruction through logical contradiction feels arbitrary rather than satisfying, like the writers gave up on finding a meaningful solution to the problems they created. The robot's final words about perfect heists being unwritten feels like the episode admitting it has no point to make. Rick's return to normal adventures with Morty resets their relationship to its starting point without addressing any of the issues raised by the story. Morty's abandonment of his screenplay represents a loss of personal growth rather than a victory. The episode ends with everyone exactly where they started, making the entire experience feel pointless. The final scene with Mr. Poopy Butthole losing his teaching job because Rick's plan required his students to attack him shows how Rick's solutions create new problems for innocent people. But this consequence gets treated as a joke rather than a serious examination of how Rick's selfishness affects others. Why this episode fails completely. One crew over the Crew-Coo's Morty fails because it mistakes cynicism for cleverness and thinks pointing out problems is the same as solving them. The episode correctly identifies many issues with heist movie formulas, the repetitive crew assembly, the predictable double crosses, the convoluted reveals, but then uses these same tired elements without improvement or subversion. The episode's meta-commentary becomes self-defeating when it subjects viewers to the exact boring, repetitive sequences it claims to criticize. Watching endless crew recruitment montages doesn't become entertaining just because characters complain about how boring crew recruitment island. The show's self-awareness makes the experience worse, not better. Most importantly, the episode abandons character development in favor of genre criticism. Rick learns nothing about why he hates heist culture or how his attitudes affect his relationships. Morty loses his creative ambitions without gaining anything in return. The supporting characters exist only as functions in the heist machine rather than as people with their own goals and feelings. The episode also fails to offer any alternative to the formulas it criticizes. If heist movies are so predictable and boring, what would a good heist story look like? The episode never answers this question, instead choosing to wallow in complaints without constructive solutions. One crew over the Crew-Coo's Morty attempts to criticize heist movie tropes by making an episode that demonstrates how boring and repetitive they are, but this approach backfires by creating a boring and repetitive episode. Rick and Morty get involved in a heist convention conflict that leads to creating Heistatron, a robot that becomes too good at heist formulas and threatens the universe with infinite crew assembly. The episode tries to be clever through meta-commentary and self-awareness, but it just becomes exactly what it's criticizing, a predictable story full of meaningless twists and reveals. Morty's subplot about writing a heist screenplay for Netflix provides the only real character development, but even this gets undermined when he abandons his creative ambitions after experiencing how stupid heist stories can be. The episode ends with everyone back where they started, having learned nothing and grown in no meaningful way. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, we got Bethic Twinst. Bethic Twinst, when family dysfunction gets too real. Bethic Twinst takes the show's usual family chaos and pushes it into uncomfortable territory that feels more disturbing than funny. The episode centers around Beth having an affair with her space clone while the family tries to have a normal Thanksgiving dinner, but the storyline crosses lines of taste and logic that make the viewing experience unpleasant rather than entertaining. Instead of using its premise for meaningful commentary about identity or relationships, the episode just wallows in awkward sexual situations and family dysfunction. The setup and space Beth's visit. The episode begins with the family preparing for Thanksgiving dinner with Space Beth visiting for the holiday weekend. This setup could create interesting dynamics about how different versions of the same person might have grown apart, but instead, the episode immediately focuses on sexual tension between the two Beths rather than exploring their different life experiences. Jerry's disturbing toast about literally dying if Beth leaves him sets an uncomfortable tone that hangs over the entire episode. His detailed description of planning suicide with an old blender reveals deep psychological problems that get treated as comedy rather than serious mental health issues. The family's casual reaction to Jerry's suicidal ideation shows how normalized dysfunction has become in their household. The introduction of realistic video games provides a subplot that mirrors the main theme about preferring fantasy to reality, but this parallel never develops into meaningful commentary. Morty and Summer's obsession with ultra-realistic games that are mostly empty space seems designed to waste time rather than advance any real themes or character development. The Beth affair begins. The two Beths bonding over back rubs quickly escalates into sexual attraction that the episode treats as inevitable rather than exploring why this might happen or what it means for their characters. Their decision to act on this attraction happens so quickly that it feels rushed and unearned rather than like a natural development of their relationship. The episode's treatment of the affair focuses on the sexual aspects rather than the emotional or psychological implications of being attracted to yourself. This approach misses opportunities to explore interesting questions about identity, self-love, and what makes relationships meaningful. Instead, we get crude jokes and uncomfortable situations that don't serve any larger purpose. Space Beth's more aggressive personality compared to regular Beth gets used mainly to justify bad behavior, rather than examine how different life experiences might change someone's character. Her dismissive attitude toward family obligations and social expectations makes her seem selfish rather than liberated. The video game distraction. The realistic video game subplot serves mainly as a way to keep Morty and Summer busy while their mothers have their affair, but it also provides heavy-handed metaphors about escapism that the episode doesn't develop well. The game's extreme realism that makes them boring and empty could comment on how avoiding real problems often creates new ones, but this theme gets lost in repetitive scenes of characters staring at screens. Rick's casual revelation that he has gloppy drop ice cream in his fridge all along undermines the Beth's excuse for going to space together. His knowing smirk about forgetting the ice cream shows he understands what's really happening, but his decision to enable the affair rather than address it directly makes him complicit in the family's dysfunction. The episode's obsession with realistic video games that are mostly empty space mirrors how the Beth's relationship is mostly built on physical attraction rather than emotional connection. But this parallel gets lost because the episode spends more time on crude humor than meaningful character development. Jerry's psychological breakdown. Jerry's installation of a pill bug protocol that lets him roll into a ball when stressed reveals how deeply his mental health has deteriorated. His preference for becoming a literal bug rather than dealing with difficult conversations shows complete emotional avoidance, but the episode treats this as quirky rather than concerning. The revelation that Jerry specifically asked Rick to install this defense mechanism during a drunken conversation shows how aware Jerry is of his own inability to handle stress. His choice to hibernate rather than confront his wife's affair demonstrates his complete abdication of responsibility in his marriage. Jerry's eventual decision to unroll and confront the situation shows some character growth, but his angry speech about being expected to be twice as confident because his wife cheated with herself reveals how the situation has damaged his self-esteem. His complaint about their expert orgasms and mocking his body shows deep insecurity that goes beyond normal jealousy. The inappropriate permission dynamic. The episode's most disturbing turn comes when Jerry gives permission for the affair to continue, creating a twisted dynamic where Beth needs her husband's approval to sleep with herself. This arrangement satisfies no one and creates uncomfortable power dynamics that the episode seems to think are funny rather than psychologically damaging. Jerry's apparent arousal at watching his wife with her clone crosses lines that make the viewing experience uncomfortable rather than entertaining. His declaration that he permits and approves of their relationship turns him into a voyeur rather than a participant in his own marriage. The Beth's reaction to Jerry's permission reveals how little they understand about healthy relationships. Their excitement about having approval shows they were looking for validation rather than genuine connection. The fact that Jerry's permission makes their affair less exciting demonstrates how much their attraction was based on rebellion rather than love. The children's discomfort. Summer and Morty's obvious discomfort with their parents' situation gets played for laughs, but their attempts to distract Jerry with video games show genuine concern for his well-being. Their understanding that something inappropriate is happening contrasts with the adults' casual attitude toward the family's breakdown. The kids' use of increasingly realistic and boring video games as escape from their family situation mirrors their parents' own avoidance behaviors. Their preference for empty digital spaces over dealing with real family problems shows how dysfunction gets passed down through generations. Morty's outburst about Discovery Channel behavior shows his disgust with his family's inappropriate conduct. His inability to articulate his feelings beyond frustrated screaming demonstrates how the adult's behavior has created trauma that the children can't process or express. Rick's enabling behavior. Rick's knowing participation in the affair through providing space stations and cover stories shows how he enables the family's worst impulses rather than helping them grow. His casual attitude toward his daughter's infidelity demonstrates his own emotional detachment and poor judgment about relationships. Rick's advice about lies piling up like credit card debt acknowledges the problems with deception but offers no real solutions. His suggestion to stay liquid treats relationships like financial transactions rather than emotional commitments requiring honesty and trust. The revelation that Rick has been facilitating similar encounters with other versions of himself shows this behavior is part of a pattern rather than a one-time mistake. His casual mention of infinite shit happening normalizes dysfunction rather than addressing its harmful effects on his family. The unsatisfying resolution. The episode's ending attempts to resolve the situation through Jerry's acceptance and the Beth's decision to continue their relationship with his permission, but this resolution satisfies no one and solves nothing. Jerry remains insecure and damaged, the Beths get what they want without consequences, and the children continue to suffer from their parents' poor choices. Space Beth's departure with the promise of future visits sets up ongoing dysfunction rather than healing or growth. The family's attempt to return to normal Thanksgiving dinner while Jerry visits a daycare for other versions of himself shows how completely their relationships have broken down. The final scene with Jerry at the Jerry daycare being told he can't visit alone because sometimes Jerrys try to touch other Jerrys provides a disturbing final joke that suggests Jerry's psychological damage may be leading to inappropriate behavior. This ending note feels cruel rather than funny. Why this episode fails so badly? Bethic Twinst fails because it takes genuinely disturbing relationship dynamics and tries to play them for comedy without understanding why they're disturbing. The episode's treatment of Jerry's suicidal ideation, the Beth's affair, and the children's trauma lacks the empathy and insight needed to make such dark material work. The episode's exploration of identity through clone relationships could have been fascinating, but instead it reduces complex questions about self-love and identity to crude sexual humor. The missed opportunities for meaningful commentary about what makes us who we are get lost in uncomfortable family dysfunction. Most importantly, the episode fails to understand the difference between edgy comedy and genuine cruelty. Jerry's psychological torture, the children's trauma, and the normalization of deeply unhealthy relationship dynamics cross lines that make the viewing experience unpleasant rather than provocative. The episode also suffers from tonal inconsistency, jumping between crude sexual humor, psychological horror, and family comedy without finding a coherent voice. The result feels scattered and uncomfortable rather than clever or insightful. Bethic Twinst attempts to explore themes of identity and relationships through Beth having an affair with her space clone during Thanksgiving dinner, but the execution crosses lines of taste and logic that make the episode disturbing rather than funny. Jerry's suicidal ideation gets treated as comedy, the children's trauma gets ignored, and the affair gets normalized through a twisted permission dynamic that satisfies no one. The episode wastes opportunities for meaningful commentary about identity and self-love in favor of crude humor and uncomfortable family dysfunction. The realistic video game subplot provides weak parallels to the main themes while serving mainly to distract characters and waste time. The episode ends with everyone damaged and nothing resolved, creating an unpleasant viewing experience that feels cruel rather than clever. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe and I'll see you in the next video.